Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Silmarillion Film Project. This is session 3 of season 7 as we continue to lay the foundation for another fun season of the Silmarillion Film Project. I am Corey Olsen, the Tolkien Professor, joined by Nick and Marie from our writer's room. Dave Kell will be joining us later on. We've talked about, we began by looking ahead down the road, looking at sort of the sort of gauging the scope of things and more or less plotting out how we're going to get to the War of Wrath from here in the next 6 seasons. And then last time we talked about the scope of season 7 and what we were going to be covering and how we were going to be handling that, but we left out an important element involving 2 major characters, and that is what's going on east of the Blue Mountains, which is most likely going to involve both Sauron and Galadriel. With Galadriel, it's time to start bringing her back in. We had, obviously one of the really fun things in adapting the story of the Silmarillion is doing frankly, a more thorough job of integrating Galadriel into the First Age than Tolkien ever really got around to doing, other than in some sketches and projections. Of course, what Christopher included in the Silmarillion were a few notes that Tolkien wrote, but again, he never really actually wrote out full versions of Galadriel's, the First Age with Galadriel sort of stories. So we had a lot of fun with this. Galadriel, of course, was one of our primary characters in our season 4 when we were looking at basically the aftermath of the arrival in, the aftermath of the kinslaying and the crossing of the Helcaraxa. And this is the first full season back in Beleriand. And we had, we are not we are gonna brag that we, of course, came up with PTSD Galadriel first, and that was the primary story of our Galadriel in season 4, as she was trying to deal with her own, both her own grief and her own sense of guilt from the kinslaying, going all the way back to the kinslaying, and of course, this also resulted in her romance with Celeborn. We answered the question, what does Galadriel see in that guy? With the answer, he was the one who understood her best and listened to her and helped her in her time. Like, he was the one who helped her to sort of get through that. And they, and so they get married. The marriage of Galadriel and Celeborn was the culminating episode of season 4. That means we've had 2 seasons, 2 very Galadriel-light seasons, as Galadriel and Celeborn have been more or less on their honeymoon for some time. So we had them out in the east, the eastern part, that is, of Beleriand, brokering relationships with the Estolads, from the unfriendship of the elves of Assyrian and such. So she was involved in that story. We, of course, brought her in. She had been a friend of Luthien. We had her and Luthien becoming friends in season 4. And so she comes back to attend Luthien's wedding. So she did come back again in season 6. But it's really been not quite cameos, but pretty minor appearances from Galadriel. And we definitely have been feeling that it is time for Galadriel to really return and for us to kind of take up the thread of her story again and decide what comes, because now we come to the great frontier, right? The bit of the story we did of her is, how does she sort of settle in? Where is she, how is she at the start of the coming into Beleriand, which is tricky. And what was particularly tricky about it is that one of the bits that does make it into the published Silmarillion, that Christopher did include in the published Silmarillion, is that she is one of the Noldor whose heart is burning to build realms of her own. And yet, of course, very notably, there is no realm of Galadriel of Beleriand and its realms, right? So we need, again, as really a result of Tolkien's not sufficiently getting a chance to fully retcon and tell the story of Galadriel in the First Age. So we that was one of the things we were doing in season 4, starting off with her being sort of politically aggressive and putting herself forward, and how and why does she end up not ruling a realm, in fact, and ending up basically hanging out with Melian for a while instead in Doriath. So having gotten her through that initial thing, now we need to begin Galadriel down the road that is going to end up with her ultimately ruling Lothlorien, but which is going to place her for the role she's going to play in the Second Age, essentially. We are told that she crosses the mountains before the fall of Gondolin and Nargothrond. And so where does she go? And what's she doing when she's over there? What is the beginning of that story? And so that's what we're going to be. So that it is time to start thinking about that. And also, of course, it's also time to do another really fun filling in a hole, which is what happens to Sauron after he flees from Luthien and Huan and totally drops out of the Silmarillion narrative for the entire rest of the First Age. Now, of course, he's still around, makes some notable appearances in the Second Age still, obviously, from the very, very start. From the story of his brief repentance, quasi-repentance, whatever exactly, however we want to handle that element. But between that moment, when we're told that he repented with some degree of sincerity or other, at the very beginning of the Second Age or the very end of the First Age, we don't know anything about what he does from the fall of Tol and Garhoth until then. So we have that space to fill in here as well. And of course, the chief reason why we saved this and didn't talk about it last time is that these two characters, Sauron and Galadriel, are our two longest running characters. Sauron was first because we got him in season 1 and 2 as well as season 3 and 4, right? Sauron is the one character who is going to tie the entire scope, even if we go all the way, to the Grey Havens at the end of the Lord of the Rings story. Sauron will be tying the entire story of the First, Second, and Third Ages all together. He is our stealth protagonist of the entire show, or antagonist, of course, but still, our sort of central, unifying character of the entire show. So we need to be thinking really carefully about how this moment fits into his overall big scale trajectory and what exactly he's doing. And similarly with Galadriel. Galadriel is one of our longest running characters, and we have to pace them both very very carefully in the First Age and beyond. And of course, the sort of third thing, which we'll be talking about in the course of doing this, is what is happening out east, right? The Easterlings come across the mountains into Beleriand, but where there's from a Beleriandic perspective, there's a lot that's east from there. There's a whole lot of east going on. So what exactly does that mean? Who are they? What are the and most importantly, thinking from a Second and Third Age perspective, who are these people? How do we get from thinking from the Third Age backwards, right? What relation are the people groups that we see in the Third Age? What relation are they to these people that we're going to be meeting and exploring here in the First Age? So those are the things we're gonna. That was a long description of our topic for today, but a but there's a lot of big picture setup. Pausing briefly for our announcements. Bunch of moots coming up, and oh man, like this is just fall and winter. The spring, there are like 5 more moots that might happen between this and May, actually. Really, really fun stuff. And then a big new moot that might happen in September next year. So really, really cool things happening. We've got starting with New England Moot in 2 days here on October 21st in Derry, New Hampshire. We have folks coming in to town here. It's always fun for me having this moot, which is the one that's right near my house. Well, okay, not very near my house, about 25 minutes from my house, but still much nicer than, much closer than most of them. So it'll be great to go to New England Moot. Yeah, one of the things we're doing at New England Moot, which is really cool, we're doing a live clue mystery game at New England Moot, and I get to be the corpse. So anyway, it's gonna be great fun.
Bring a sleeping bag or a mat or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So yeah. So that's in Derry, New Hampshire. Mountain Moot is a couple weeks down the road in Denver, Colorado, on November 4th. Then in December, down to New Orleans for Bayou Moot, Osmoot in Sydney, Australia in January, and Sunshine Moot in February. And then we're going to be in Southern California. We're going to be in England. We're going to be in Texas. We may be up in Canada, in Alberta. There are all kinds of things that are jostling for position here in the spring, which we're about ready. And a couple in the fall, as I say. So anyway, yeah. That's gonna be awesome. So, but let's get back to, so one of the things that we want to think about here is geography, and we've got a couple versions of maps that fans have made to try to stitch together Beleriand and Arador and the rest, and Ravanian, right? That how would it all geographically sort of fit together? And it's sort of tricky. This one is fun. So I think the biggest problem is sort of seeing where the coastline is going to be. I think that I'm not sure I agree with where Harlinden is down here, way at the bottom of these Blue Mountains. I think that's got to be further north. But if we there's another one. Hang on, let me get the other one. Okay, so here's this is a nice, pretty one from Reddit. This is made by James Noepa, and the interesting thing here, of course, is that the Grey Havens are basically landlocked in the First Age, right? Because the coast is going to be cutting in right here near Nogrod, essentially, where they have Nogrod. So, yeah. So the Shire is, so this means one of the interesting things is if you kind of look across this, to look at like what is at the same sort of latitude, right? So you have basically Nargothrond and the Shire are basically at the same latitude, right? You've got Hithlum and Forakel basically at the same latitude, which and Erebor not too much further south, frankly, from that as well. There are a lot of things. Mount Gundabad, way up in the north. Mount Gundabad at basically the same latitude as Thangorodrim, essentially. Anyway, it's
that I have less of a problem with.
Me too.
In fact, I get the feeling in the map of The Hobbit, the way that he talks about it, that Mount Gundabad may have actually occupied his imagination as Angband.
Yeah.
As like
possibly.
the former location where all the orcs were and whatnot.
Right. Yeah. It does seem to have that basic kind of
in the same way that Thranduil is
position. Yes, exactly. Yeah. There's a mountain fortress in the north, which is like the ultimate home base of all, like the ultimate source and home base of where all the goblins came from, right? Yeah, I agree. Anyway, okay.
I mean, there's obvious challenges with putting the maps together. The map of Beleriand and the map of Middle Earth don't have the same scale.
Yeah.
And we do know what survives of Beleriand are those 3 islands. So there are maps that have the 3 islands on them, but are they to the same scale that you would think based on where those places were supposed to have been in Beleriand? Like there's choices to be made, and I think each map maker who is stitching it together has to make some assumptions.
Right.
So this is just a suggestion to remind us of what is east of Beleriand without committing to any particular depictions.
One day, one of Tolkien's great-grandchildren is going to open up a shoebox somewhere and find within it, folded up, the map of combined Beleriand and the Lord of the Rings Middle Earth, and it will break the internet.
I'm pretty sure Christopher drew all those maps, so I'm pretty sure he knew about which maps existed.
Well, no, but that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that Christopher's great-grandchildren are going to discover a shoebox somewhere where he secretly sketched out what his own opinion of how they stitched together were, but he didn't feel that it was sufficiently
accurate
justified
enough
by the text to release it, and so he never published it or let on that it existed, but he totally did it in secret. Like that I could believe.
Okay. So yes, should that aversion arise, then we'll use that one.
Yes.
But in the meantime, have some pretty pictures.
So let's just think for a second about kind of what this means for our story, because on the one hand, realistically speaking, the Easterlings who are going to cross the mountains are going to be gathering here in Lothlan north of Himring, right? So we're talking about them crossing over either in Thargelion and going north to Lothlan, or from Forachel across to Anfalgwith and coming down, right? One of those two, they're somewhere around up here, north or south of Lake Hellivorn is where they're crossing over. Right.
And which one of those really would be telling a huge piece of the story? Because there's no way a group of people that large goes up in the Farakel unless they have no other choice.
Yeah, I mean,
they're pursuing the devil who stole their shiny gems or something like that. That's the other.
That's another thing that brings people into the frozen north. You're suggesting?
Yes.
It has been known to happen.
It's more likely than you'd think.
Exactly, right? It comes up more often than one might expect.
Well, I figured I'd cut that one off because, as I was saying, I was like, somebody's gonna bring up the Helcaraxel.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, that's so.
But exactly, there has to be a story as to why you cross the Helcaraxel, just like you would presume there would be a story as to why a large group of people would go to Forachel, for instance. Whereas the story about why a large group of people settles in such a way that there is a warlord at Bree that you requested last time, and that group decides to migrate over the mountains, that is a different type of story.
Yeah, I am all in on the warlord of Bree story. By the way, I have some really big.
Oh yeah. I think there's a Khan of Bree who is going to go, and but then he's gonna die in the, he's gonna be Ulfang or something, and then anyway, it's gonna be awesome. No, it's the reason, of course, I was talking last time about wanting there to be like Bree to be the capital of like
An empire,
a warrior empire, is that we know that the Breelanders have been there forever, right? And that kind of immediately suggests the idea that like those villages in the form in which we met them have been there in that form for like 10,000 years, right? But that's super unusual. Like that almost never happens. When you have a place like that where people live in one spot for 10,000, that happens. But usually there is like a very dynamic, history of the ebbing and flowing of events. And it seems to me not only, frankly, more likely, but also more fun to think that the Breelanders are still there where they have been. But like back in the day, they used to be,
Think about the ancestors of Barleyman Butterbur being like these great horse archers of the East.
Exactly. I don't know why I'm thinking of the Mongols, but I kind of am. And I mean, it doesn't exactly fit. I mean, with like the whole horse culture and thing. I'm not trying to lean into that parallel too closely. But again, just the idea of Bree having been once a
thriving metropolis.
Yeah, or like a savage warrior king, oh man, like come on, it's awesome.
A very different culture than what we meet.
Very different culture than what we meet.
Okay.
Because we're still talking about,
I'll bet you the Greenway has an ancient road under it that predates the Numenorian colonization.
Absolutely. And
like everything about it screams that there's an archaeological gold mine underneath there.
I think so. But yes, I mean, again, thinking about the chronological gap between the Bree of the First Age right here and the Bree that Frodo and company stay in. I mean, it's like longer. It's like between us and like Mesopotamia, like us and Gilgamesh, basically.
Yeah,
it's 7,000 years we're talking.
Yeah,
so,
it's an enormously long time.
So basically, if we were going to look at this from the point of view of like, what would Tolkien do with this? It'd be, okay, so Bree is the modern name in the Third Age, but clearly there was an ancient name that was much longer that has been eroded down to the term Bree. So we've got to figure out what it used to be called.
That is
in
exactly
the real name.
what I'm thinking. Yeah, Bree even sounds like the stub of a name, doesn't it?
Right.
Really does. Does.
Yeah.
So, but one of the reasons that this becomes important, and that the maps here really help to emphasize this, right, is that the land on the other side of the Blue Mountains is not just Arador, it's northern Arador. I mean, so, Arnor, Forachel, Arnor, and the Shire are the primary lands right there. Like they're all passing through the Shire on the way. I mean, again, if you look at where the Beor's
the Grey
people
Havens is
crossed over.
Land.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
It's important to remember, however, that a lot of this is probably still covered in the old forest, which extends all the way down to Fangorn at this period.
Right. Can we show squirrels leaping from tree to tree? This has to happen, right? We have to have some cameos, some squirrel cameos, right? Squirrel runs happening to show that it's still possible. Anyway, so we'll see. But anyway, the point is, we have to be thinking about the cultures and peoples of northern Arador, of the very familiar, of the Breelands and the Shire, and around Lake Evendim and up into Forachel, which means we need to think backwards, from way backwards, again 7,000 years backwards, from the people of Forachel that we meet in Appendix A, from the Breelanders that we meet in the Lord of the Rings. Obviously, we know the Arnor and the Druedain, sort of how that goes back, but yeah, it's really, I mean, we can be thinking also about things like the Dunlendings, right? The Hillmen of Rhudaur. There are clearly some other human groups, non-Numenorian, right? Non-Edain human groups. Needless to say, there could be any number of cultures that don't survive into the Third Age, right? Anyway, so there's a lot to think about here. This is going to come up in the context of thinking through Sauron's story and Galadriel's story. But we really do need to kind of think about these things, because one of the things that I know has happened to me many times in reading the Silmarillion. Silmarillion starts talking about Easterlings, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, my brain already has a shelf that things people labeled Easterlings fit on, right?
Mm-hmm. But these are not your grandfather's Easterlings.
These are not
your grandfather's Easterlings.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's this kind of like, if I don't force myself to stop and think about it, there's this kind of slippage in my brain where like the map sort of folds itself in my head and juxtaposes Rhûn and Beleriand, right? As if people are coming straight from, as if but when in Beleriand, when in the First Age we say Easterlings, we mean potentially Breelanders, because they're the ones who are on the other side of the mountain, right? And again, I'm not saying all of the, that Bor and Ulfang are Breelanders necessarily, but that's what we're talking about. So again, clearly we need to figure out who the Breelanders, who the Easterlings are exactly.
Yeah.
They can be different groups.
Yep.
I mean, this is a large group of people we're talking about, so there's no need to make it one monolithic group, or even two. Like, it could be a pretty involved situation that we're only seeing parts of.
Yeah.
Well, the lands were inhabited at the time of the Second Age, when when Arnor came into existence, because they were somebody for them to be ruling over. They didn't populate that entire vast countryside with Numenorian refugees. Those people, they had
Right. They only had so many ships that came from Numenor.
Right.
And that land the last moment there.
Yes.
Right.
Somebody's tilling those fields, right?
Right.
And
even if there were a bunch of Numenorian shiploads that had come over in the years before, and so, Elendil and company are just the last boatloads, to come. Still, there's gonna as we know, we know for certain in Gondor, right? There were lots of other native populations that merged with the, and that becomes a major plot line in all versions of the story that Tolkien is thinking of. So yes, presumably in Arnor, absolutely still true. Yeah,
and we kind of touched on this a lot during the discussion of the frame for season 5 also, because we have you start peeling back the layers of, like, for example, whose barrows do the Barrow Wights inhabit? Is that explicitly discussed at some point? Don't they predate Arnor though?
It's got to have. I mean, on the one hand, yes, we're told that like the people of Cardolan buried their dead there, and had their fortress there in the Barrow Downs as well. But I cannot imagine that the Barrows and the Barrow Downs only date from the period of Arnor. I mean, I think they have to have been. I'm totally on Lotro's side on this one. I've done lots of in-game archaeology in the Barrow Downs there, and I love how they have evidence of like the Arnorian period overlaid on top of clearly very, very ancient
Yeah.
burial grounds there.
Yeah.
And that almost has to be true, I think.
Okay. So, assuming that that's true, then we're in that period now.
Yeah.
So, whoever these people are, these are the original barrow builders.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yes.
So why do cultures build barrows? Is it a stab at eternity because the people after you remember you? In the way that the pyramids are kind of that.
Yeah, though the thing that's particularly interesting to me about the Barrow Downs is the geography, right? Or the topography, perhaps, would be more accurate. Like that, they're like, okay, we're gonna build barrows to bury. We're not just gonna build barrows to bury our dead, right? We're gonna build barrows to bury our dead up there on those huge hills that are right near town, right? So we've got our comparatively low-lying town, and then there are these downs, which are like really, really steep, flat-topped hills, which begin, pretty close outside of town, and therefore would be a hugely prominent element of the local landscape. And so it kind of is a big deal. It's kind of a big statement for them to say, no, up on top of those hills, that's where the barrows are going. We're not going to build our town up there, right? Which we could do, which would have this commanding presence over the whole region. No, we're going to build the tombs of the dead up on top of those hills. And that does suggest something, I think, about the culture.
I mean, it kind of suggests something pyramid-like, honestly.
Yes.
Like it's
yes.
Right. So you can look at it as the building a monument to be remembered after you're gone type of thing.
It is literally the exaltation of the dead. I mean, they're
Right.
putting the dead up on
But
high.
then the other idea is, what does that tell you about the culture's beliefs as to what happens to people who have died? Are they sticking around? So do you build them these really big fancy barrows to be like, we still remember you, don't hurt us.
Right.
Is it a fear of the dead? Is
Right.
it a respect for the dead? Is it a celebration of the dead? Like, is it a death is meaningless, we just pass on from this life to the next life and it's all continuous and who cares?
Right.
Like, it could be a lot of different things that would all look like, let's build a giant thing on top of a hill for the dead.
Well, let's talk about why. So the Barrow Downs separate. That clearly would have, even in the time of the old forest, right? That would rise above the forest.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it's possible that the forest does not wrap around them either. That would keep the greenway.
There's a boundary.
Yeah.
Right. The question is, because Bree kind of rises up on the at the crux of the roads, right? The Greenway and the Great Road, the King's Road. Well, I guess the Greenway was also called the King's Road. That's
the Dwarf Road. The East-West Road is the Dwarf Road.
Is the Dwarf Road, right? The Greenway is the King's Road. That's right.
And the Dwarf Road probably exists in some format already because it's connecting Nogrod and Belagast to Khazad-dûm.
Yep.
So
okay.
So the Dwarf Road, at least,
because they wouldn't have built that road. They wouldn't have built that road if Khazad-dûm did not already. If Khazad-dûm and Belagast and Nogrod are not in their prime.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that road exists. Does it predate human settlement here?
Yeah. I mean,
probably,
because assuming
that road, yes, the crossroad,
the East-West
might
road,
have been a human thing.
That seems
the dwarves, likely. The dwarves were living in Nogrod, Belagast, and Khazad-dûm long before humans migrated. Seems certain. So the only question would be: were the dwarves traveling between Nogrod and Belagast and Khazad-dûm already? And I don't see any reason why not.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's the case, then this human civilization straddles the dwarf road, which means that there's a relation. There has to be some kind of relationship. Now,
Right.
whether it's an antagonistic one or,
it could be kind of Caranthier-esque, the
yes,
relationship.
yeah,
Trade based.
Right, trade based. Except and like some kind of like agreement whereby like, because the humans are getting something from it, right? Like we will maintain this road that goes through the middle of your realm and is very useful to you. And let's face it, way better than your crappy roads, right?
Yeah.
Because we're dwarves and
yeah.
and we're
Your
good at
road
this.
gets overgrown a few thousand years from now. That's
Exactly,
Like, that's
exactly.
why even have it?
Right. By the way, I'm theorizing also that there would have been a road from the what is called the dwarf road, again, at least by the way that this map is lining things up, looks like it went straight from Nogrod to the through to the Misty Mountains, and then across the Misty Mountains and off towards the Grey Mountains as well. I'm assuming there was a south road too from Belagost straight over to Khazad-dûm, possibly crossing the Gwathlo at Tharbad. A lot of that area, of course, is underwater in the Third Age, so there's a good reason why that road didn't survive. Whereas the Northern Dwarf Road, it continues to be used and maintained by dwarves for thousands of years afterwards, while the Southern Dwarf Road dies off. But that there would be a road from Belagost, again, crossing in the more or less region of Tharbad, and then straight up to the, to the west gate of Moria, seems very sensible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why build the Greenway?
Well,
That's a Numenorian thing later.
Yeah, the Numenorians would build it up, but again, especially if you've got a human kingdom that's based at Bree, right? And
Yeah.
especially if we think about that southeast, a second east-west road that connects Belagost and Moria, the Greenway, and crosses at Tharbad, the Greenway would connect the two.
Bree to Tharbad, yeah.
Bree to Tharbad, connecting the two dwarf roads. So that would give a, like primary travel arteries, right, for their kingdom.
And from Tharbad, you have a connection to the ocean.
Yeah.
The river goes right to the sea.
Yeah, it's navigable from there. Yeah.
Right. So you can also have a boat traffic situation.
Yep.
Through Tharbad.
Yeah.
So, because the big question to me, because if Bree arises solely once the two roads exist, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
But if the Greenway was built to service a civilization that was already growing in the area, then it becomes a question of why here.
Right.
Now, of course, if much of every Arador is covered in an enormous forest, that kind of helps answer that question.
Yeah.
Because it's possible these humans are the downside is possible that the humans are terrified of this forest. It makes perfect sense that they would be.
It does.
Because so there's the downs at the Barrow Downs, but there's more downs to the north over by Fornost.
The North Downs, and the Weather Hills.
Right. So Fornost isn't going to exist yet.
Right.
But if the kingdom that will become Bree is everything from the North Downs to the South Downs and the Weather Hills, like that whole area.
Yeah.
If it's between all those hills and it's in the low-lying part in the middle, like.
Yeah, especially if, again, as you say,
that has its own cohesion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If, as you say, Nick, there is
a big scary forest.
A big scary forest, and the
full
big
of trees that might eat you.
Yeah, I mean that's a known danger, right? I mean, you don't want to run afoul of young lad Willow, right?
Right. Yeah.
Who may already be going bad, but yeah. So thinking, all right. continuing with roads for a second.
Mhm.
If we have the east-west road from Nogrod, and again, where is it going? It's going, I mean, in the map, it looks like it's going to Rivendell, which of course it's not. It's going to the High Pass, right? Over the mountains. Rivendell shall eventually be built near that, right? But
Sure.
it's going to the High Pass, across, then out to, so that we can get out towards the Iron Hills and the Grey Mountains out in this region, right? So the dwarves are presumably have something going on over here, or we could just say that the road east of Bree doesn't exist yet. But I think I don't see any
That
reason
seems-
to believe we can. I mean, we need 7 fathers of the dwarves, right? So we've accounted for 3 of them in Moria, Nogrod, and Belagast. There's still 4 more kicking around.
The Iron Hills might predate the expulsion from Moria, and it may have been, laying empty when
Yes.
Dain arrived. And Dain's like, "Oh, perfect. This is
Right.
We just got to clear this out of all the giant rats, and we're
Right.
golden."
Are there some dwarves out in the Iron Hills / Arid Mithrin / Gundabad after Durin left? Is there another dwarf family? Very possibly, right? In which case there'd be a road, right? There'd be a dwarf road so that they could get over there.
It's occurring to me how this civilization may have developed. It may be the dwarves' fault. So
That's what I'm thinking.
If you have a group of people living nomadic existences along the dwarf road, and they're probably raiding caravans and making a general nuisance of themselves, so the dwarves come up with this genius idea of civilizing these people to make them kind of dependent on them. And in so doing, they, but of course they don't count on once the fact that these humans settle down. Now they're going to kind of start taking over everything.
They might not take them that seriously. The dwarves might not take the humans that seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we see this kind of behavior with the, because these people may actually be the ancestors of the Haladin. Not the ancestors, but like the Haladin may have splintered off from these people,
right?
Much earlier.
Sure.
Okay.
We can think about links back to both to the Edain ultimately, like where the Edain came from,
and then forward in
and
time.
then forward, towards Third Age peoples that we know. But yeah, no. So hang on, I'm still looking at the roads here. Because Sarn Ford, right? If there are the 2 east-west roads, the Nogrod one, which goes through what will be Bree, crosses over the High Pass, and heads up towards the northern dwarves, whoever's up there in the Iron Hills, Arid Mithrin area. Then, and you've got the southern Belagast road, lost in the Third Age because mostly underwater, which goes from Belagast across to Tharbad, crosses the river there, and then heads straight to Khazad-dûm. That would be the fastest road to Khazad-dûm. The dwarves of Nogrod, they're going to want to get down there too. So, in fact, the road that goes from Tharbad to Sarn Ford to Mickle-Delving is a very logical cut down that the dwarves of Nogrod would make to come down from the mountains, and then angle down across, because they've got to cross the Baranduin and they've got to cross the Gwathlo, right? And for them to do that at Sarn Ford and Tharbad makes perfect sense, especially if at Tharbad their road meets the Belagast road and they can all head straight to Moria from there, right? To the main entrance of Moria. In which case, this means then that not only the dwarf roads, the east-west bands of these dwarf roads would make obvious migration routes for humans coming west, right? Especially since presumably they would have been there before any of the humans. But if there is also, if not the straight north-south road that goes straight, the greenway that goes to Bree and Fornost, but at least the one that branches off to Sarn Ford, it's also encouraging northerly migration. In fact, if you think about it, if you're coming, say you're humans who don't particularly feel like crossing the Misty Mountains, either at the High Pass or at the Red Horn Gate, but just want to wander your way through the Gap of Rohan, right? And you would still need to get to Tharbad, but once you got up to the river, now you got a road, right? You've got a road that heads straight from there and which angles you straight up to the northwest and pushes you directly. I mean, it's like a highway to Beleriand at that point, and will dump you right on the western or the eastern side of the Emin Luin, and ready for you to cross into Thargelion like they do, right?
Okay, so what if the Baorians predate any kind of good relationships with the dwarves?
Okay,
where the Baorians are kind of afraid of the dwarves a little bit, at least in their cultural memory. Of course, this kind of messes with the song that's written for them, that we've written for them. But if that's the case, then that explains why they decided to hoof it directly over the mountains rather than take the road. This is a smaller group, and this is an early set of travelers.
I'm also thinking, even according to the song that we made, the Baorians are like the most teleological of all of these migratory groups, right? They're not just like, hey, let's find new lands in Arador and settle down, and then after a while maybe we'll keep going, right? The Baorians are looking for the light in the west, right? So they're going to keep going west. So with them, it wouldn't just be like, hey, let's migrate this way. It'd be like, hey, we were headed west anyway, and here's a perfectly good road through the scary forest, right? That stretches over this whole thing.
People group may have actually come through this region. Like, they don't come from here. They came through here already.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, we've shown migration into Beleriand 3 times now, and it got successively bigger each time.
Yep.
Suggesting that the earliest group was the fastest moving group that was most dedicated to let's just get west as quickly as we can. We're not going to stop and dawdle here. We're now ready to show some fairly large groups that could have done some pretty significant dawdling.
Exactly.
They could have settled down somewhere for a chunk of time. The motivation to get moving again is going to have to then come from something in Arador. Like, there's got to be something that convinces them now's the time to go somewhere else. And obviously, if we're making a whole kingdom focused around the area around Bree with these roads and all this trade, they can be getting news from the dwarves about things that are happening in Beleriand. Like, they don't have to be ignorant of what's on the other side of those mountains before they make the decision to go.
Right. Okay. So I agree. There does need to be something pushing them. And not just pushing, like, when we think about the Easterlings crossing to join in the Near Ninth Arnoidiad, we're talking about, like, the last step, right? They had to have been right there on the other side of the mountains to be doing that crossing. In other words, they need to have been being pushed for some time prior to this, potentially.
Well, maybe. Because... or maybe that has something to do with the other topic that we wanted to talk about, which is
what
Sauron and Galadriel. Right. Because it would be really interesting if there was some play for the two of them to be involved.
Yes.
In this.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. I like the idea. So I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but I'm staring at the map, so I'm thinking about geography, and we can kind of continue putting together the actual story, but I'm just kind of thinking of, like, elements, right? I like the idea of the kingdom of Bree essentially extending, like, being the hills, right? Especially, again, if we think about the proto-forest, which Elrond is so fond of imagining the squirrels in, right? The squirrel, the dominion of squirrels, which the humans would not be having a wide flung kingdom in the empire of the squirrels, right? So, but if we imagine that those forests, Elrond said doesn't say from all the way up north, right? I'm thinking north of the Dwarf Road is where the forests more or less end, right? So that up on the North Downs, the Weather Hills, I mean, there's some like the Chetwood is north of the road. So I don't mean that like it's a sharp line at the road exactly. Though the Chetwood could conceivably be a younger forest as well, but we don't get any indication from the description of the Chetwood that it's an ancient forest like the Old Forest. So it could very well be a new growth forest that has grown up in the time of the Breelanders, like in the last millennium, basically.
D-Rod Curry is requesting a different word for us to use in this context rather than Easterlings because that's confusing.
Wholly inadequate.
Yeah, there's been a suggestion for old Aradorians. I don't see any reason to not just say Aradorians in this context.
Right. The question is whether they settle down and become Aradorians or whether they're just passing through Arador. Essentially.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
Well, I mean, just passing through is a matter of timelines and perspective.
Right.
Because we're not suggesting that any of these people groups are from Arador, like, at all.
Right.
They are all from Hildorian.
Yeah.
As were all the Edain.
Yeah.
The question is just, how long they're going to stay there. And they're not going to stay there past 472 of the first age because we need them for the Near Knife.
Right. Exactly. Well,
I mean, some of them can stay behind. We don't need to have the whole group come over,
and it's worth noting, enough. It's worth noting that Hildorian is really, really far from Beleriand.
Yes. I mean, so that's my point. They're not from here. They've migrated a long way to get here. So even if they settled here for like a century or so, it's like they just got there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It would be a pretty swift migration. Yeah.
Yes. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Dave. So we're looking at maps and talking
about roads
and Arador, and we haven't even gotten to Sauron and Galadriel yet.
Rapid progress.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you were expecting.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm surprised you got this far.
Yeah. In fact, Maria, I'm doing even worse than you foreboded, which is instead of spending an hour on slide 1, we haven't even gotten to slide 1 yet.
I know.
This is entirely my fault because I brought up the Greenway. So this is on me.
No, I think.
No, I wanted to look at a different map this time for a reason, because if we're going to talk about this area, it was important to have some concept of what we're doing. So no, I expected to spend a little time on the map.
So this is really interesting.
Okay. So maybe we should kind of figure out the timeline of this area in relation to our existing Edain populations. Because we have the Baorians that come across, the Haladin who come across, and then the Estelators, and that's a big deal because that's a big group of people. And I feel like it would be difficult for them to pass through an area that had been settled without disrupting it.
Yep. Unless they were people who had settled there and were getting pushed out themselves.
Yes, it's possible.
So
and the area between the downs does make for a good Estelad culture center.
Yes.
Yeah, because our idea with the Estelad people is that they were kind of a migratory people who had no intention of settling down anywhere.
Right.
They were interested in an area where they could move their fields essentially from place to place. So having them cross the mountains was just a blip to them. They were already we're just migratory. Yeah.
They could have been some of the first settlers at Bree, though. Well, okay, hang on. So here's an important question. Are there any relations? Like, are either of the two major, assuming that I'm still calling them the Easterlings for the sake of like talking about the people who come over, the people of Bor and Ulfast, right? So the people of Bor and Ulf. Wait, which one is the dad?
It's too clumsy. We're not going to be able to keep that up.
Yeah. Which one's the older one?
Give me a second. Because Ulfang is the one who's the traitor, but that's during the war. So his father
That's
is the
kid.
real one.
Okay, Ulfast. Then it must be. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got
Yeah,
the
let
people of
me-
Bor and Ulfast. So we've got, at the very least, we have two distinct like ethnic groups or people groups within the set of people who come across the Blue Mountains, right?
Yeah.
Which means we're now up to 5 separate people groups total.
Maybe.
Nope.
Maybe.
Oh,
That's
I'm
my
wrong.
question. Are they connected?
Ulfang is the dad. Ulfast is the son, who is the
Okay.
traitor.
Ulfang is the dead. Okay.
And it's Uldor who's the accursed, which is the name I
Uldor.
actually
Yeah,
remember.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So yes.
All right. So here's one option. One option is I like the idea that the people of Bayor, they're a whole separate thing, right? They're this like small clan, which they're the early adopters, right?
And even if this area was already settled, that's no big deal to them. They could.
They don't care. They would just pass
a group
through.
that small could pass through, no problem.
Absolutely. So the people of Bayor, they're totally their own thing. The Haladin and the Estelads would definitely be people who would be presumably splintering off from groups. So I'm imagining for a moment here that the group of people who eventually go to settle at Estelad were the original settlers of Bree, of the Bree lands, right?
Okay.
So they set up the first, like around between the Barrow Downs, Weather Hills, North Downs, South Downs, right in that area.
They had their little migratory
They
thing
followed
going
the
on,
dwarf
and
roads. They got through the forest. They came to the hills and were like, yeah, this is it. We're going to settle here. But then after a while, a few generations, right, some of them continue migrating because, as you suggested, they're not like we're going to settle down and build stone houses and stay here for thousands of years kind of culture anyway. So anyway, some of them migrate and become the third kindred of the Edain, right? But some would stay.
So what is their relationship, if any, to the Haladin is the question. Who get there before them.
So the
So-
Haladin...
Who are a farming or are becoming an agricultural civilization is a strong word, but
I would say that some of the predominant traits of the Haladin, especially when they first arrive in Beleriand, is that they're fiercely independent.
Yeah.
They all want their own homesteads.
yeah.
And they don't want anyone to mess with them. So if they were existing somewhere in Arador and another culture moved in and set up shop and started building an empire, they would have noped right
They
out
don't
of
wanna
that.
play
and
along
cross,
with that.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be part of somebody's empire. They wanted to have their own little homestead.
Right.
Yes, they are.
They're basically
They're almost
Americans.
explicitly based on the American settlers when we introduced them
Right, exactly.
in season 5.
Yeah, they build,
They build a stockade and everything,
Right,
like
the
this
stockade
Boonesboro, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. Little
The point
cul-de-sacs.
being, they could be someone who was displaced by
Yeah.
a later group coming in.
Yeah.
That would fit them,
Yeah,
right?
it
If
would.
they got displaced, they would leave.
It would.
And so the Estelad culture is existing concurrently. So somebody was bringing this up earlier, the cowmen versus the farmers, right?
Yeah.
Can the cowmen and the farmers be friends, right?
Yes.
From Oklahoma, I think
That is from Oklahoma. Yes.
Okay.
Good memory.
So they brought it up. Somebody. So they are existing concurrently in the area.
Yeah.
But as that happens, by the time we meet them in the Second Age, those two groups have been the Estelators have been completely absorbed by then. Because the young people keep going into the cities to meet the nice city girls, and then they're never seen again. So they wind up feeding pigs somewhere, and it's just terrible.
They go into the pool halls, and it's all over.
Yeah, that's the end
Yeah.
of it.
What is this going to turn into, Pinocchio?
No, well, I'm just kind of explaining why that culture winds up homogenizing. Essentially, is what I'm after there.
I see.
Theory. Brief theory. The one of the descendants of the Haladin culture are the Dunlendings.
Okay.
Some go west to find their own place to not be bothered. Some go south.
And then are eventually displaced by the Rohirrim,
And they're real bothered.
which they really can't stand.
Which that's like the last straw. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Or rather,
Okay.
like yet again. But again, because they have, that's what suggested it to me, because they have a history of being displaced by both more aggressive, more mobile, that is like, horse based, and more. Oh wait.
Yeah.
Look at that. Okay. The Haladin language was related to what eventually became the Dunlending language in the Second Age.
Done.
QED. Okay, so yeah, because I mean, it makes sense that like a culture whose predominant element is that like they just want to live on their own and not be bothered is always going to be displaced by a more like aggressive and more unified and more warlike culture. Not just because they're going to fight them off, but even just because they're going to want to like not be neighbors with them. They're going to move away, right? They're going to either be actively displaced or they're going to move off. So this would suggest then that the Haladin were the first to arrive in Arador. Well, I mean, again, not counting Beor's bad data point, right? They're the first ones to arrive in Arador. Then the ancestors of the Estolads come in, right? And the Haladin get displaced. Some of them, of course, go west and cross the mountains, and some of them go south and end up in Dunland and Calenarthon, right?
Yes.
And Edwythe and sort of down there, which again is
Points out.
easy to imagine, like scattered peoples happily living on their own homesteads and having nobody bother them throughout those lands, basically.
Sure.
Until the Numenorians show up. But anyway, okay. So then the Estolads come in and they establish Bree. They like build towns. They're the town builders. Like again,
not the Esteladders, the proto.
Well, I'm thinking like these would be the proto Estoladders.
The proto betrayers are the town builders. The Esteladders are living in the same land.
They live in the Bree land.
Okay.
But they're
Right.
doing their little we just heard cattle in circles thing.
You heard cattle.
I don't know. You guys are the ones who brought up the cattle.
We're circling the
I don't know that we had
wagons
cattle.
around Bree. That's what
No. I mean, in Estelad, it's migratory, right? You
Right.
you have your field, and then you move to a new grazing land later, right?
Okay,
Yes,
okay,
yes.
all right.
So-
And once a year you meet at the Estelad.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So
So
these
the
aren't,
once
these
a
aren't the
year
proto
thing was-
Breelanders then.
Right.
No.
These are like the proto, either the proto Hillman of Rudour or the proto Forakel folks, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's say that some went to Estelad and some went to Forocal.
Yeah. So
Because we're going to displace everybody. If the Haladin got displaced south, these guys need to be
Right.
displaced north.
right.
Just
Okay.
for-
So if
just
the
for symmetry.
right, if the Estoladders,
Mhm.
maybe they made their way, because again, we're all coming from the east, right?
Mhm.
So they come in, they make their way north up the Vale of Anduin, right?
Mhm.
And then they cross on the Dwarf Road, because there's a convenient Dwarf Road over the mountains, right?
The high pass.
The
Right.
High Pass, yeah.
Yeah.
So then they come
No
down.
goblins yet there to.
That's right. Goblins aren't
Mhm.
there.
So they make their way to Bree. They're like, what a lovely place.
Well, they make their way, but I don't even think they go to Bree. I think they come through and they settle in Rudour, and then points north.
Oh,
Right,
okay,
let them
sure.
roam on like the plains north of the North Downs, essentially.
sure.
And then from there, some will end up going west across the mountains, and some will end up going going north to Foracal, and
Okay.
kind of hang and staying there. Right.
And now the group that comes in and founds Bree
It founds Bree,
and makes the Bree land.
the evil
That
empire.
is, it could be an evil empire.
That's an exaggeration.
It could be a perfectly decent empire of
It could
people
be
who
a
get
very
corrupted by
upstanding
Sauron.
empire.
The Barrow Builders.
Yeah,
Right.
the Barrow Builder culture.
The Barrow
comes in.
Builders, yes. These are builders. Unlike the
Mhm.
Estoladders and unlike the Haladin. Well, the Haladin build on a small scale.
Well,
but they're
yeah,
not.
Yeah.
on a small scale.
They don't build in stone. They don't build monuments.
Right, and they're not
Yeah.
interested in
Cities.
lasting impact on the environment
Yep.
to prove their
Existence.
not immortality, their importance.
Yeah, to leave a mark on the land.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Look
okay,
on in my works, you mighty end despair.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Look-
So the idea of this group coming in and founding Bree,
yes.
that will be the source of who we want to recruit to come to Beleriand to join
Yes.
the war.
Yes.
And obviously, we're not going to bring everybody over the mountain, so we can leave people in Bree to have roles in the Second Age. Like they can become peoples, just like the Proto-Haladin and the Proto-Estelad groups are still there. Like
Yeah.
these guys can still be there too.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
that's, I think, the moment at which their culture forms is when they build Bree and the Baradowns.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Here's what I like about this, because so GD Taran is suggesting that we're defining these people by how they built tombs, but not entirely. The other thing there are a couple data points that we have, right? One is that this was a fixed, like, city,
Settlement,
township settlement, which is
Yeah.
going to be permanent and built in stone, and also have I'm gonna say like relatively not pyramid grandiose tombs, right? But again, they like made the choice to be like up
More
on
grandiose than I'm gonna get.
Agreed.
I mean, fair. But I think the idea here is that Tolkien did have groups that were real into building
tombs
for the dead.
Yeah.
And some of them were the dwarves,
Mhm.
right? Like dwarves do that. And some of them are the Numenorians.
Yes.
And the Numenorians got real into it.
They're like next level. Yeah.
Right. And that was considered a
Red
maybe
flag.
not great part of their culture.
No,
Yeah. There was
exactly.
something off about the Numenorians when they got into that. So we can go both ways with that here.
Yeah.
It can be like, there's something weird about these people. They build these giant tomb things. Or it could be hey, this culture of humans actually builds things, unlike the other groups that we've met. Like they're forming a civilization that's independent of the elves.
Yeah.
Which the other groups hadn't really done. They were not quite at civilization level when they bumped into the elves, and
Right.
therefore got various degrees of elven influence in how they would form a civilization.
Right.
And
Right.
even the Haladin who are like, no, thank you, please leave us alone, still got a lot of elven influence.
Yes. Yes.
And I'd say it would be coming on pretty strong to even call the Haladin a civilization.
Well, yeah, I mean, less so than the other groups, because the other groups got more friendly with the elves.
Right.
right. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So the fourth group that arrives at or passes through Arador, let's just call it. Is it the people of Bor, the people of Ulfang? So one thing that we know about the people of Bor is the people of Bor are going to be the ancestors of the Rohirrim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Tolkien suggests this in the War of the Jewels.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to want to think of a through line of the people, the survivors of the people of Bor.
Can they have chariots?
I think somebody's got to.
I mean, like,
Have
because
cool
it's a little
chariots.
weird that we haven't done chariots.
Now, like, chariots are not a super useful war machine in forested terrain.
Right,
Forested
but
and
they're
hilly
not.
terrain.
But where they're at is protected from the forest by the
Right.
downs.
But then again, like, Queen Boudica has chariots, and Britain is.
So if you really want one, you can make it
Yeah.
work.
Well,
is what
yeah,
I'm
I mean,
hearing.
the
'Cause there's a road.
Julius Caesar talks about having
Yeah.
chariots come out of the woods at them.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, they're small and adapted for this, but yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
Okay.
true.
So this group that is going to become the ancestors of the Rohirrim, they're going to look a little bit like the Estelad people.
Yes.
They're going to look like the House of Hadar.
But the difference
Probably.
is they're going to, unlike the Esteladers, they're going to settle.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
They're going to settle and build cities.
Okay.
Yes.
Build
All
cities
right.
and tombs.
So
Which you need to kind of have that level in order to have horse husbandry to
thinking-
the point where you could have chariots.
Let's make the Breelanders the people of Ulfang.
Okay.
okay.
Because assuming we're going to have some level of horse culture be the kind of through line between the people of Bor and eventually the Rohirrim, right? Through the Eotheod and everything else, right? Down the road. It would make less sense that the horse culture was the one who is like, let's build cities and tombs of stone. Like, that doesn't seem quite so fitting, right? So,
Okay. I also would like the Boar group to be smaller and the Ulfang group to be larger.
Yep.
For later betrayal purposes.
Yep.
I think that would be helpful.
Agreed. And so if the people of Ulfang are from the, like, people who established the Imperial Center at Bree, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And if the chariot and the charioteers group is a little bit smaller but has really good horsepower and these unique chariots, then it could explain why the elves are like, ooh, let's make friends with these guys.
And
right?
these guys can also be kind of operating as the auxiliaries to the armed forces of this larger culture.
Yep.
That's, I mean, the Romans did that all the time.
Yeah. So the Ulfang folks could actually routinely hire chariot drivers of
Bor.
Yeah. And so they could even suggest them. Like if the Ulfang Empire, right, is what's making they'll be like, hey, actually, we know a guy, right? Let's bring in these folks. You would want them, especially. I mean, they would take one look at Enfalgwith and be like, oh man, like what you need are some chariots, and we can hook you up, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the people of Ulfang is going to be the main group that comes over the mountain for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And they're going to recruit the House of Bor to come with them. And then that will okay. I'm all right with that. I think that can work well for our story. Of course, we now need to come to the point of why.
Right. No, we're getting there. We're getting so
why
close.
Do the people of Ulfang go to Beleriand?
So
aren't they happy in their town that they have built of stone?
Exactly.
On the
so the question becomes then,
road.
If we have the Ulfangian proto-Breeland Empire, right? One of two things has happened, right? Either that has been largely displaced and those people are the people who were living there have been displaced and are now migrating and they end up crossing the mountains in large quantities, or they there's a split of some kind, right? And some of them stay and some of them leave and head off over the mountains, or the group that heads out over the mountains is like the away team, right? Actually sent that direction, but under the order, like they're
the other possibility
exploratory conquering mission or something.
Is that something has gone wrong, and that they no longer think that the Breeland will be a good place to live, and they need to pick up and leave as a group. Like that explains why so many Easterlings come over the mountain.
But this is starting to get us towards actually discussing what happens with Sauron, I feel, and that is something we've been avoiding for an hour and a half already.
I have a thought about that.
Okay.
Do you remember what we all thought was going to turn out to, well, I don't know about all, but what we thought was going to be the big reveal about who Sauron was in Rings of Power. That he was like a guy working in Celebrimbor's shop. And
totally is still, by the way. I have not, I haven't changed my mind about that in the slightest bit. But go ahead.
In spite of the overwhelming.
No. I'm not saying the Halbrand reveal isn't true. I'm saying the other is
okay.
also true.
Okay, I got
That's
you.
what he was doing before he got on the boat for reasons. But go on.
Yeah. So, Ulfast is the son?
Ulfast is
Yes,
the son.
Ulfast is the
Ulfast
second
and
son.
Ul-
So Ulfang is the father who's going to
Yeah.
die before the Near-Ninth. The
Yes.
oldest son is Uldor the Accursed.
Yes. So
and Ulfast is the one who stays true, is he?
No, Ulfast is the second son who also is a
Who also
traitor,
true.
but
Yeah.
maybe not like as responsible as his
Yeah.
big brother.
So
who-
the
who
traitor
gets
son,
a very specific epithet.
whoever the traitor son is, he
Uldor the Accursed.
Uldor
Yes.
the Accursed, yeah.
he has a best friend that
Mhm.
that helps him maneuver himself into position to push his father to move
Yes.
them into new lands just at the time as an emissary
Yeah.
of the elves in the west arrives to ask them to do that very thing.
Yes.
Is his best friend's name Halbrand?
His
Yeah.
best friend's name is Halbrand. That's so weird.
Right. Right.
And
So the
Yeah,
general
that-
idea is that Sauron is manipulating the son of the warlord of Bree.
Yes.
I like it.
And so he outmaneuvers Galadriel, therefore driving her towards even more anger and resentment towards him personally.
Because Galadriel's overall trajectory was she arrives in Middle-earth all set to be like, I'm going to be a leader, I'm going to have a kingdom, I'm like the next big thing, right? And then she has her like humbling you know,
Then she meets Melian.
right, psychiatric experience, right, in Doriath, and then she changes her mind. So her first attempts after this can't be like, well, let's get back to founding a kingdom, right? But if she tries to do this in a non-imperialistic way, and
Right.
it doesn't pan out, right?
Right.
So she is going to emerge from this saying, you know what I need? Forget it. Like the gloves are coming off. I need a kingdom here for crying
No
out loud.
more Miss Nice Galadriel.
Exactly. No more Miss Diplomat, right? It's time to start ruling folks like I mean business.
And none of this would have ever happened if she'd only had the foresight to bring Celeborn the Wise along with her. Why?
Right. Celeborn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So
Okay.
So
All
the
right.
general idea here is that Galadriel is going to seek out human allies in the East because she knows that it's time to do that. And she's going to try and play diplomat, and she thinks she's doing a really good job of basically what Arador tried to do back in season 5 of I'm going to go out, unite all the people, get them together, and then when we fight Morgoth, it'll work.
Hi, Mithros. I have delivered this immense army into your keeping.
Have fun
Aren't
with
I
that.
awesome?
And she
Right.
is very intelligent and very forward thinking. And one of the results of the trajectory of her story is that where all of the rest of the elf captains are focused on Angband, right? They're all oriented on Angband and on their own kingdom. She doesn't have a kingdom, right? But she's out there in the East. She just had this awkward diplomatic experience with the Estelators when they came over, right? So Galadriel is the one of the elves. Like the other, also like Mithros was late to the human party, right? But he's interested in making up for lost time, right? Galadriel, though, even Mithros and all of the other human friends among the elves, right, out in Beleriand, they're still not thinking ahead, right? Galadriel's the one who's like, has anybody else noticed that these waves of humans keep coming
And
from
keep getting
the
bigger?
east, right, and getting bigger? Maybe we should get out in front of this, right? Maybe somebody should head over there and see where is the next wave, when are they coming, and can we maybe
Get them here sooner and on our side.
exactly
From the jump, instead of having to like work through several generations of them.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So that seems like a very Galadriel strategy, right? So she
so
crosses.
we're gonna see Finrod and Beor play out again with Galadriel and Allfang.
Yes.
Possibly.
Because he's going to be old and he's going to die before the battle.
Yeah.
Right.
So she's going to have calculated everything, and her entire diplomatic investment is going to be in the leader of the people, who's not going to last.
Okay.
And she will have overlooked that she really needed to make sure his oldest son was also on board with her plan.
Possibly.
Mm.
I guess it depends
And didn't
on.
have a best friend named Halbrand.
Yeah, that too.
I
But like,
guess
there's going to be some
Yeah.
generational thing there that
Yep.
she's going to misstep on.
Yep. I think that, okay. So it depends on how directly we want Galadriel and Sauron to be like in competition here, right? Because I could see a couple different versions of this. Like I could imagine there being a people group or a subgroup of these people that Galadriel makes friends with, and Sauron gets to Ulfang and Ulfast instead, right? And Uldor, and Galadriel's people just like don't make it. Like they don't even get there. Like, so it's so her initiative fails, and instead it's Sauron's people who get up there. But if they were just enemies from the beginning, she would probably warn Maedhros about that. So that doesn't seem like that works completely.
Right.
But,
I think that they are in fact appearing to be on the same side.
Right.
Like Sauron is pushing for these people to do exactly what Galadriel's asking them to do.
What a burn for Galadriel if her great diplomatic success turns out to be the people who in fact betray the elves and lead to the. So basically we're gonna send her off in a whole nother tailspin, because it's gonna turn out that the whole Nirnaeth Arnodiad was her fault. That's a horrible thing to do to Galadriel. I love it.
I've been saying that we need a backslide for her for a couple of years now.
The other issue is that, as written, the idiot elf who befriends the betrayer men is Caranthir. And the audience is quite primed to realize if Caranthir is like, oh, my new best friends who flatter me all the time, they're like, dude, they're totally going to betray you.
Right.
But if we have Galadriel go on a big diplomatic mission and recruit some people, that isn't.
We think that's going to work.
Yeah.
That's not as inevitably a terrible idea.
Yeah.
So even if she sends them to Caranthir afterwards, so that he's like coordinating their troop movements or something,
which again, if we look at the map, they would, because they'd be crossing into Thargelion and coming up that way. So she would be almost compelled to use Caranthir as a liaison.
Right. She'd have to put up with him as a Yeah. So, like, in that context, I feel like the story would be somewhat organically developing, and yet still not this inevitable, well, that's a dumb idea.
Yes.
That's never going to work.
Yes.
They're being idiots. Like, I don't want it to be that inevitable from the beginning.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. Galadriel really does help to avoid that.
Although it's obviously going to hurt her badly. So Celeborn's not involved in this? This is a solo trip that she does?
I'm wondering about that.
Because...
Well, I've been saying that one of the best ways to get Galadriel into a vulnerable place to have her do some backsliding is to put some distance between her and Celeborn, because he's so, like, as we've written him, he's such a stabilizing force for her.
Okay. So what we need to consider is, what is Celeborn's role in the remainder of the history of Doriath? Because technically he was the king's guy. Like, I don't know what his title was, whether he was an ambassador or a chamberlain or whatnot, but he was a pretty significant role in Thingol's court. And he got permission to go hang out in Osirian and have a honeymoon for, a few hundred years. But is he going to go back? Does he have a job there?
So their separating makes perfect sense on one level, because it's clearly not the time of the children yet, because the wars are still ongoing.
Right.
So we're totally going to wait until the Second Age for Celebrian to be born. That makes perfect sense, right? And so therefore, since they're not, escalating their relationship to childbearing
Family.
yet,
Right.
it would make perfect sense for them to pursue separate things, especially if. But I agree, Marie. The impulse that you're having, I think, is exactly right. We can't just have Galadriel be like, "Stay home, honey. I don't need you. I'm headed off." He has to have a thing that he has to do too, right?
He could be helping Thingol navigate this really sticky Silmaril situation.
Yeah, Celeborn could take one look at this and say, "We have a situation unfolding. I need to stay," and he's going to fail if thinks he's going to do any good there, because he's not. But yeah, I mean, he's got to see that that's a powder keg, right? And what he has, so the other two, so we always had 3.5 dudes for Thingol, right? Celeborn, Mablung, Beleg, and Dairon, but he was never like a.
Yeah.
He was Luthien's
he's
friend.
Junior. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mablung and Beleg, of course, are still there, but Mablung and Beleg, like Mablung is the soldier and Beleg is the scout, right? Celeborn is the like diplomat, politician, counselor dude, right?
Yeah.
So it would make all kinds of sense so Galadriel says to Celeborn, "Hey, okay, end of honeymoon in Osiriand. It's time for us to get to work. We need to be, things are falling apart in Beleriand. We need to take action. What should we do?" And she says, she tells him her whole we got to get out in front of this human migration thing, right? And he's like, "I think you're right, honey. That sounds really important. But I'm looking at this Silmaril situation in Doriath, and this looks like it's already at bad and it's headed straight towards worse, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think I can leave Thingol here. I want to see, and of course we have to keep this in mind because in the future of Doriath we have to have a prominent role for Celeborn in trying to do some good here in the inevitably unfolding situation with the Feanorians and such.
Yeah.
Which he knows, like Celeborn knows this is not going to play to Thingol's strengths.
No. And
Right.
G.D. Talarian suggests Celeborn being an ambassador to the Union of Mythos.
Yeah.
Having Celeborn occupying
Yes.
Thingol's seat at that table makes a lot of sense.
A lot of sense. Yes, have him involved in all, and which is great because then he can connect up with Galadriel again, right? Galadriel comes back and is like, "Hey, guess what? Recruited a huge bloody army of humans," right? And he's like,
And
"Good
he's like,
job,
"That's
honey."
great because our guys aren't coming."
Exactly. Our guys. The bad news is, yeah, exactly. So, but no, that's perfect. I agree because that way we can have Beleg and Mablung as they show up to the battle because they don't want to miss it. Celeborn we have no idea whether Celeborn was there or not. We can put him there. I think that we can make Celeborn be in the battle even.
I've said for a long time that I don't think that there's any reason why Beleg and Mablung can't at least have like a personal entourage with
Right.
them.
I don't think they have to be absolutely alone. Yes.
Right. No, it's simply that they did not bring the army.
The army of
Doriath.
Right.
Doriath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
having them bring like a small squadron of guys with them like you would while traveling through a dangerous area anyway seems
Right.
only prudent.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
but
I mean-
if we're gonna give him the diplomat role, we might not put him in the army. Role,
I don't mean on the
but-
front lines, of course, but
No. But
if
the
he's-
point is,
yeah.
we can develop what his storyline is because he'll
Yeah.
be part of the story.
It'd be part of the story. Yeah. No, I agree. And it's interesting. I mean, the Chuckia Witka, I don't know how to pronounce it, on YouTube.
That's Adola.
Oh, it's Adola. Yeah. Adola was, thank you. I'll just use the second word. Adola was saying, there could be sort of some kind of romantic setback between the two of them. I don't know that we have to go that far, but at the very least, even just showing how it works with elves, right? Like
They're at a different stage now, different time.
they're different time
But
now.
they
And the idea
can-
of like, okay, we both have our separate callings, which we're going to pursue separately. Especially
Doesn't
remember, we
mean
just
they're-
had the
they're
whole
not breaking up.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. But at the same
Yeah.
time, they're not doing the Baron and Luthien "where you go, I shall go also" thing, which was so
Right.
prominent in the previous season, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're a lot more career focused.
They're a lot more career.
Yes.
Exactly. They're okay living apart for a while, but no, I mean, just kind of showing how that, because it does seem to work that way with elves, right? They'll go off for
Because they
centuries in
can
order
always do it
pursue
later.
things.
Yeah.
Huh?
What's
You can always
a
do it later,
few hundred
yeah.
years?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Clearly now's not the time for children anyway.
And I think one thing I like about this too is I like the fact that we're finding a way to involve them in major events. I feel like we're setting them up by doing this sort of thing, having them even split up and go and be involved in different things. Really, we're setting them up to be like the people that they are in the Lord of the Rings, where it's like, why would you esteem both of them so much? And this gives you the reason why, because they weren't just like off in a corner doing something. They were like moving, or they were going about Beleriand, being involved in all the.
They're moving pieces on the board of the world. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
like
this even begins to show a trajectory which makes Galadriel's compliment of Celeborn the Wise not sound absurd. Right?
Yeah.
Because if her reaction to, so again, just taking this one mini event, right? Which again, in their whole trajectory is just one little episode, but the Ulfang episode, right? The Ulfang fiasco for Galadriel, right?
Yeah.
Her reaction to that is going to be bad, right? She's going to be like, that's it. I'm like, no more Miss Diplomat, right? I'm going to rule. But meanwhile, Celeborn has been watching Thingol's increasingly problematic reign, right? And so Celeborn, the like master diplomat and like wise politician, says like, okay, Doriath, he's there watching Doriath fall to pieces around him. And so he comes back and he's like, okay, so honey, I've got some constructive ideas about like how we rule a realm properly and not let that happen again. Right.
Yeah.
So he can always be, as he was in season 4, this like steadying force that helps her, so he will be the moderating
That's the point I was
factor.
making before.
Yeah, exactly. He will be the moderating factor. And we can see how so having him be the Doriath person, I think that perfectly sets this up. I like that a lot. No, that's cool. Okay. So
I just kind of like the idea of Galadriel having an audience in a chamber which occupies the space on which the prancing pony will one day stand.
Sure. Absolutely.
Or, I mean, seriously, Bag End.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, we're in that whole area.
I feel like Bag End is in the forest, though.
Well,
it's to the west.
It's to
the road
the
goes straight through.
west of. Yeah, but
it doesn't.
Well, does the road go right by Bag End? Does it literally? Because it might.
It goes through Hobbiton.
Yeah, that for sure.
I don't know if it goes like right in front of Bag End, like right in front of the hill, but
like
I think
the driveway pulls right in.
It does go along the water. So
yes, yeah.
The point is, we could pick anything in that region and make it a spot, and then raise that set and put a new set on top of it for another scene and be like, same place, you guys.
We could have Galadriel plant the party tree.
No,
that would be really
Come
cool.
on.
Because think about that, how it gets replaced by
how it
from Sam.
the only Malarn.
Come on.
That's pretty awesome.
Come
that's
on.
So the general idea is that we want to get that culture established as its own thing, and then bring all of them to Beleriand. Are we going to leave anybody behind in Bree?
Oh yeah. Well, so
Civilians.
This is one of the challenges of having it be a subset, having it be an expeditionary force, essentially from Bree, is that it's a huge group of people, and it seems like it's the description. And as we were talking about the quantities that need to be present in order for it to have the impact that we were talking about, it feels like a migration rather than an expeditionary military force.
Yeah.
That's why.
I mean, eventually it is. The question is whether it is a military force first and then the families come later. I mean,
yeah. Well, dramatically speaking, the idea of Galadriel raises an army and brings an army, like that it arrives as an army, not just like a migratory group, feels more dramatically effective in the immediate
I agree.
build up to the battle.
I really don't have a problem with the proto Breelanders, like that the occupying force
Right.
that resides in Dorloman, kind of just taking over there and filling in the spaces left by the men who died in the Near Ninth.
Yep.
And not having brought any of their families with them.
Right.
Or the vast majority. No, because I think there are a few of the women there, at least, that are mentioned by... There's one that's mentioned by name.
But some of them... Yeah. So... But again, there would be a whole bunch of camp followers and folks that come along with the army. I mean, it's not just like...
Right. But okay, so it is going to be an army and not a migration. That's kind of where I was trying to figure out. And it makes sense. We want Bree to be continuously inhabited throughout its history, I would think.
That means that like whoever is like the God Emperor of Bree is and I'm experimenting with various enormously grandiose titles because it gets funnier every time, in my personal opinion. But anyway, so whoever is the God Emperor of Bree has
Old Fang Butterbird
has to be like he's not like depopulating his kingdom in order to send his expeditionary force, right?
No.
So there has to be something like
these people get demolished by the Númenorian colonization.
Yes.
The Númenorians come back and start colonizing this area
and hauling them back to be slaves
and just disrupting and destroying this kingdom.
Yeah,
they have no shot.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so we'll make a second age story out of what happens to the people who stayed in Bree.
Yes. Yeah, they get
okay,
and
therefore Allfang might be the leader of the army, not the king.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Ooh.
And maybe one could easily imagine so I'm like thinking I'm the God Emperor of Bree. What's the rationale, right? The rationale would be Butterbor.
Badisha Emperor of the Four Corners of the Bree Land. Yes.
Badisha Emperor. Butterbor. That's too good. Oh man. Okay. Anyway, sorry. All right. So anyway, point is, what is his counsel? Like, why does he send? Because it's got to, at the very least, this has to be a huge portion of his military strength, right?
He knows he's in on it.
He's in on it.
He's in on the betrayal.
The betrayal. So
Allfang doesn't know,
right?
Because he's an honorable dude. He's made friends with Galadriel. He's
Allfang is on the up and up, but but the God Emperor of Bree, this is all part because he knows basically his army is going to be expanding. He's imagining expanding his kingdom across the mountains.
Yes. Right. So this is he obviously has a very large group of people he's in charge of, because if he's sending that size of an army, he's got a big group.
Yeah.
So it is maybe a living space situation of we've filled out the land that is not the scary forest here.
Right.
And therefore we hear you have some beautiful lands to the west that are available or will be soon.
He's going to be blown away by the elvish technology that he sees, the armor, the weapons that Galadriel has. I mean, it basically, so he's going to say, like, all we have to do is pretend to be allies to these elves. we can turn on them, rout them, and then all their land and all their stuff is ours, and I shall become, you know,
Yeah, he has
Emperor.
no idea what he's dealing with.
no. So he with Melkor, no clue, because of
We
course
don't use that name anymore.
no, I know, but it's been no. I mean, Morgoth has. It's been since the eclipse almost. I mean, Morgoth hasn't been
He
out.
might think, and Sauron might be perfectly happy to allow him to think, that Morgoth is a mythological figure that doesn't really exist.
Yes.
Those people who are the elves' enemies over there on the other side of the mountains, they still worship this ancient god that our ancestors once worshipped, but he's not real.
The orcs are real, but the
Yes.
orcs are just these like savage bestial creatures that live in the north that the elves are, for reasons best known to themselves, trying to exterminate, right?
Yes.
So they're fighting a real battle, and you know, I mean, you can even tell them about the dragon. Like, there's a dragon, like that's real too. So there's an actual war that they're fighting. They're these creatures that they're seeking allies against them. But yeah, don't really believe in. Oh, and what a beautiful symmetry, right? Like between Sauron coming into Numenor and saying, you should worship Morgoth, right? The real true god of the world. And here him being like, actually Morgoth doesn't really exist. Like he's just a mythical figure.
He's a statue that we speak through on occasion.
Right. He's like, yeah, we've totally hoodwinked these. There is no Morgoth. Really shows the flexibility of Sauron's strategies, right? In doing this. I kind of love that, actually. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then but then Morgoth turns out to be real, and things don't go for the Emperor of Bree as he plans. So this means that Sauron's strategy is both to corrupt the Emperor and then be assigned by the Emperor to accompany the army. And Ulfang isn't necessarily into him, but Uldor, he
does.
Yeah.
Ulfang may not be aware. Like, as far as he's concerned, this is just another dude.
Right. Yeah.
Should we,
But hang on a second. Go ahead.
should we also do the thing where maybe the God Emperor wants to get rid of Ulfang?
Yeah, he could be a rival, especially if he's like the greatest. Yeah, he's a really noble dude, and he's a great general, and all of his people love him. All like the armies are all loyal to him, which is like a really dangerous thing for an emperor, right?
Oh yeah,
Right.
Yeah. So like,
just ask Brutus.
yeah, there are many examples of that kind of thing, right? So
The general
Julius Caesar, for that
idea
matter.
is that there's a political reason to do
Yes.
everything that
Yeah.
the Easterlings are doing, and both Galadriel and Sauron are trying to turn it to work for them.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Galadriel, like Sauron's 100% aware of Galadriel's presence. She comes in all glowy and Galadriel-y, and yeah, she makes a big impression. He is really under the table and behind the scenes manipulating things, and we could even not have the viewers aware that he's there.
I was going to say, at some point, we need to discuss what the audience knows at what point.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we obviously had to talk about what he's saying to the king to make any of this happen. But is the audience privy to any of these conversations with God Emperor of Bree?
We
And
could
Does the
make it
audience know that it's Sauron?
Yeah.
Or do
So-
we cast a different actor so it's some random dude who was
We-
Sauron all along at the end?
Yeah.
That feels a little...
Well, there's a few things. One, the Sauron all along dude should wear, like, his costume should cover his neck the entire time. Because this isn't ridiculous, I swear. Because
I love it. I love it.
Huon is also a Maya spirit, so he's able to damage Sauron at the metaphysical level.
Well, look, if Sauron still has 9 fingers on his on his hands, then yeah, he can sustain enduring wounds, right?
Yeah.
Well, that was after
Yeah,
Numenor.
I know.
And
But-
he can still do the fair form thing.
Yeah,
So-
but this is pretty recent. Like, this is
It is.
right after.
I if we want to do the thing where he has a wound that hasn't healed yet, that's fine. I'm just pointing out that there's a significant difference
There.
between the Huon fight and the
and the
Isildur
absolutely.
losing a finger
it's
situation.
True. It's true. Just saying, there's precedent for maiming Sauron. Is all.
Yes.
Yeah, but
But
I
there
agree,
was
it's
a
different.
there was an important step in Sauron's
Totally,
life
totally,
and being
totally, yeah.
in between those two things. The drowning
Absolutely.
of Numenor
Yeah.
totally
And there'll
messed
be
up his
a-
body.
Yeah.
Then there'll be a scene later in the season where he undoes his collar, and then we see the wound on his neck, and we go,
Right.
Or yes, attentive people put together, like, who's the dude with the bites
Right.
on his throat? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I meant by, is it going to be a surprise? Are we
Right.
going to use the same actor who's been Sauron the whole
No,
time? So
I-
everyone's
I
like,
don't
oh,
think-
it's Sauron.
Yeah, because I feel like that's going to make it obvious. Now, what we can do is see some of the backroom dealings between the God Emperor Bree and and Uldor.
Yeah.
That
I
we
think,
could show. It could seem like a purely political game that's being played there.
it would be worse and worse if we do the whole thing essentially from Galadriel's point of view. And she thinks she's got a finger on the pulse the whole time and doesn't
Mhm.
realize that Sauron was ever there.
Okay.
this is really just a much better version of what they tried to do in Rings of Power.
Well,
I was going to say, we
it's-
seem to have taken certain elements of their story. That's for sure.
well, like, on the one hand, like, honestly, the elements that we're taking are kind of superficial. Like,
Yeah,
the
they're the dumb
story
things.
itself is totally different.
Oh, I
Yeah.
know. I think our story is going to be fun. And I really don't care about the reveal of Sauron to the audience. That
No.
doesn't seem like the interesting part of this.
No.
But I do care if we are trying to hide it.
This by the way, this has like kind of a nice kind of some nice parallels with our Harad frame story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
does.
I mean, that's what we're really leaning into here.
Yes, exactly. So let's get into Sauron's view. So we'll come back to the viewers in a minute.
Mhm.
But getting into Sauron's head here, right? On the one hand, he is being... Is he a little once bitten, twice shy on the powerful elf maiden coming in? I mean, is he like a little wary of Galadriel because he's just had a bad experience?
No,
essentially?
it's not that. It's purely political. I mean, he might, but more importantly, he wants to get this army into Beleriand under the like right under the noses of the elf lords in a position of trust.
because
where it can do the most
he's doing the
damage.
Sauron thing and being clever and devious instead of doing the Gothmog thing and
Hitting it with a hammer.
wielding an army like a blunt force weapon.
Right.
Yep.
So yeah, it's in his best interest to lay low.
So we could have our cake and eat it too. I don't know if we want to do this. He could be there as himself as well. And we just never see him and
The double.
Uldor's friend in the same room at the same time.
Right.
Right.
Well, I don't.
And because it's neutral territory, Galadriel and Sauron can't immediately just go at it, and he makes it appear as though he's trying to convince the God Emperor not to go along with this plan at all.
Right.
So she thinks she's beaten him
When in
when
fact,
she gets the army,
right.
and it was Sauron's plan all along. I mean, the advantage there is that we get to see that Sauron is involved, and we understand that it's his story before we get to the very end and the reveal.
Yeah.
Right.
The disadvantage is that we have to have two characters be Sauron at once, which is
Well, but the other thing is, I want to think more carefully about the continuity with the Sauron we showed in the first half of season
yeah, like you
6.
said, is he afraid of people, and what is he trying to accomplish here?
Because remember,
that,
he took a step in season 6, and his step
Yeah.
was like, dude, I'm the Dark Lord right here. Like I'm still clever, I'm still devious, but I'm gonna start ruling like a king here. I'm gonna assert my own will. I'm gonna set up on my own and be the big bad. Like that's the step he was taking. With his necromancy and with Tolin Garahoth until Luthien and Huan. So and again, so he meets Galadriel. The two of them are the only Beleriandic representatives in all of Arador, right? Why doesn't he just throw down with her? He took out her brother. He could take out her, probably.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe,
Right.
I mean, maybe not. But again, like, why wouldn't he go there? Why wouldn't he continue? And again, and the answer is trauma, right? That didn't pan out. He lost during Gwethel. He lost his pot of evil got destroyed. He had stupid fang marks in his throat, and he now, like, gets the trembling knees whenever he sees a powerful elf maiden, right? Like he's like, okay, maybe I'm gonna walk it back a few steps, and
Okay.
let's go back to subterfuge.
So the Dark Lord thing didn't pan out for him this time. So he's not doing Dark Lord right now.
Yeah.
However, he was pretty enamored of the necromancy thing.
Yeah.
There's no reason for him to give it up.
Nope.
And this is a culture that is into barrow building.
And we've got a great experimental ground of places where we need dark spirits coming into barrows sooner or later.
About to say, so this might be a time for him to start barrow whiting.
We could do a little pre-gaming on the barrow whiting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's choose a little barrow white laboratory, off on the side. Yeah.
Right. So if he's there for that, and then Galadriel shows up to do the army thing, and he's like, "Oh, well, I can totally mess this up." Well, like if
this could be really awesome.
He's like, I know how to completely take the wind out of her sails. Like, if he just sees what she's doing and is like, oh yeah, I totally cut that off at the knees and back to barrow whites. Like, if it's not even his main plan and he just totally destroys her thing and ruins the Near Knights.
That's like a footnote in what he's really after.
That might fit what he's up to right now.
Yeah, the hard thing. So I'm definitely in the camp that says he is continuing to move further away from Morgoth, not closer. Like,
right.
Tolngaroth was the first step where he was like, okay, I'm fed up with these
I'm the
morons.
Dark Lord. Yeah.
Right. I'm the Dark Lord now. And I don't think that after his defeat, he's like chastened and like, well, maybe I'll be a team player now. Right. So
I think this is still part of his plan. Like, he is inserting people who are more loyal to him than they are to Morgoth right into Morgoth's army. He can have a plan to get rid of the Balrogs a little later. That's coming up, right?
But it's also a good hedge, because if it ends up benefiting Morgoth, then he's...
What exactly? What is the... Think of the range of outcomes of the Near Ninth from Sauron's perspective, right? Optimum outcome. They all destroy each other.
Yes.
Right? Like, the field littered with the dead on both sides. All the orcs die. All the elves die. Morgoth is weak.
Necromancy for all.
Necromancy for all.
Right.
All the dead
I just
bodies.
come in
like,
with my zombie army.
Yeah, I mean, it's a win-win situation. Like, that's optimal, right? The second best case is the elves get stomped and Morgoth wins. In which case, he's got to be thinking, right? I mean, especially having explored, the land of, area. Look, I mean, it's a wide world here, right? I mean, like, this is a big map, and Morgoth is stuck in the top left corner and doesn't even leave anymore, right?
Yep.
So fine, let Morgoth stay in his volcanoes. Right? Let Glaurung rule Beleriand. Who cares? Sauron's got the whole rest of the continent, right? He's got the whole rest of the Great Lands to himself, right? So again, second best scenario is he helps Morgoth win the war. He doesn't need kudos from Morgoth. He's not trying to suck up, right? He's just saying like, okay, so then whatever. They'll stay over there. I'll do my thing over here. And if it does eventually come down to Sauron versus Morgoth, well, he's going to
already have an army there.
Way bigger armies than Morgoth, right? Not that he's actively thinking about conflict with Morgoth at this point, but again, he's now totally feathering his own
just
nest.
build
And I
an
wonder
army
how I
for
could
a rainy
combine these
day
people with
in
orcs.
case you need it.
There are lots of experiments to be done. For
Right.
sure.
You know, just start getting your options in order there. And he has kind of written humans off to this point.
Yeah.
Like, he was involved with the whole Amlok situation.
Yeah.
He obviously has met Baron and had the Dorthonian stuff under control. So it's not that he's had nothing to do with humans.
Yeah.
But in general, He
But
hasn't.
there's some interesting stuff about them that we need to kind of watch now.
Yep.
Right. So he's developing an interest in humans, and studying Arador might be a good way for him to develop that.
His necromancy was totally elf necromancy. He could be experimenting in human-based necromancy, which he didn't do before.
Right. So that may be more of a zombie situation and less of a ghost situation.
Yeah. Yeah, like how do I keep the bodies animated after the Feyre has left? Because I can't control the Feyre. The Feyre is gone. I might have a few seconds with it before it takes off.
Yeah, exactly.
At best.
Yeah.
And this is a proto. Ooh, because he eventually does learn how to bind the body and the Feyre.
Well,
through the
nearly
rings.
indefinitely,
As long as you don't die, sure. That's the whole ring wraith situation.
Yeah, but when you're virtually unkillable,
right? So you've got his early experiments in elf-based necromancy. So like the alpha ring of power that was the pot of evil, right?
Yes.
And then you combine that with later experimentations of human necromancy, which are mostly like zombie-esque, and
keeping the Hroa alive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Now we bring those two things together, rings of power, and we can stretch them like
almost
a very
indefinitely.
Small amount of butter over a massive quantity of bread, and now we're in business, right?
Right.
Right.
So the wraithification process is his like
next project.
Yeah, the final steps there.
Yeah. All right. So that seems to fit his interests and be developing him in a direction that makes sense for him.
And he's patient. Maybe he's doing that. So I kind of like the idea of he goes to the Barrow Downs because he's like, hey, look, he's flying over, right, dripping blood. And he's like, oh, look, a big, huge, prominent burial ground on top of the hills, right? I mean, he'd see that from the sky as he was flying over. And so he's like, oh, okay, let's do some, I'll set up a mobile lab, right, in the Barrow Downs and do some experimenting. And then Galadriel shows up at the town literally down the hill from him, right, in the human city. And so there's this, Sauron kind of peeking over the edge of the hills, being like, oh, "What's going on down there?" Right? Oh, there's a plot by. Wouldn't you know it? There's a plot, but there's a Noldor elf maiden down here who's elf woman in any case, down in Bree, and I'm gonna thwart this, and this could then lead him to. That's what springboards him on the whole military thing, and I'm going to corrupt the emperor, and okay.
This also helps get rid of Galadriel,
right?
Because he doesn't want her around, because his experience is when he has elf women around, they tend to screw up his necromancy.
It does not go well, and especially since she's,
even if he's not afraid of her, like for his own personal safety, he just knows like I can't do my work in peace with this person here.
Right. I mean, Sauron's first thought as he's flying over Arador, right, coming from Beleriand, is, look at this place. This place actually is kind of awesome, right? This is my new, playground now, and nobody else is over here. And then Galadriel. So when Galadriel shows up, she's a threat, right? And she's the only one of the Noldor who's doing this expansionism thing into what he thinks is his new terrain, right? He hasn't started to conquer it yet, because again, not going full Dark Lord yet. He's going to do his experimentation first and try to build back up to that, right? So he's super patient. His first move isn't to move on the Emperor when he comes into town, right? But nevertheless, he's kind of in his own mind staked out Arnor, all of Arador, right? As like, this is me, whatever. I'm not going to worry about what's west of the mountains now. Morgoth and the Noldor can fight that out until they all die, right? I'm going to live over here, but crap, now Galadriel's here. So now the Noldor are going to be interfering over here too. I got to nip that in the bud right away, right?
Yeah. And while I'm at it, I can also I can also get an army in under Mithros' nose, get that same army in under Morgoth's nose.
I could just lob a big old hand grenade over the mountains and hope it blows up as many people as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be a totally opportunistic thing from Sauron's perspective.
Yes, that works out.
This presents us the opportunity to do, Nick, something like you were describing without being too crazy about it. That is the two Sauron things. So we have Sauron, we see Sauron doing these things, but then when he goes into town and works with the Emperor, and he changes his form, and we don't know his form, and we don't. So that the fact that Sauron is in the neighborhood, the fact that Sauron sees Galadriel arrive and says, well, crap, there goes the neighborhood, right, is like that we pretty much show. But then he vanishes, and we don't know what comes of Sauron until the reveal at the end, right? And I don't even know that he has to be around. Like, I don't even think it has to be like a character that you have come to know and like is revealed to be Sauron at the end. I don't think that has to be true. I just think we have to see that, like, the reveal could even be like in a conversation, like that everyone's dying at the Near-Knife, and we cut back to Bree, and we have Sauron having tea with the God Emperor of Bree, discussing, you know, the whole things and the outcomes and how this is working out exactly as Sauron planned all along, right? And as he had been working behind the scenes to orchestrate. You know what I mean? Like, we don't even need the Sauron in disguise character to be a character. Exactly. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to need a motivation for Aldor, because if we've shown why Allfang agreed with Galadriel and was such an honorable, noble guy and took his giant army into the west,
Right.
after he dies and his son does an about face on that, why? And
right.
I realize that the tea with the Emperor scene at the end would be like, oh, it was Sauron all along. But what does Aldor get out of that?
So
we need to show Aldor's
we need
progression.
to set that up earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so all that needs to be set up is at the beginning, the God Emperor feels like he can't stop Ulfang from doing this, right? But he needs, so it's one of the things like, okay, ostensibly he's like, oh, fine, take your army, go out there, and probably, maybe, if I'm lucky, you get killed. If I'm unlucky, you survive, and I figure out some other way to deal with you, but you're not right here now.
That's part of the deal with the Emperor.
Right.
Sauron says, look, don't worry about, I'm going to take care of your Ulfang problem one way or the other, right? Because the Emperor's going to be like, okay, look, this could backfire horribly. If Ulfang takes the army and establishes this new kingdom, I could then be raising up an even stronger rival, you know, over there. Like, if he wins, then that'd be horrible. And Sauron's like, it's okay, I got you. Like, I'll just off him if it comes to that. Like, I can just kill him anytime I want to, right? Well, and also don't worry, they're gonna get plastered over there. Like, it'll be fine.
Yeah. So, but Uldor, we could, I mean, here's the thing, like, Ulfang just dies.
Yeah.
In the book, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't.
Right. If we're gonna have a plot where Uldor kills his father, I mean, he needs a motivation. It needs to be something very personal.
Right. And
I don't want to rule out the fact that also he's just a jerk. Like, that is, he doesn't have to be a great and noble son of the great and noble man who is corrupted by Sauron.
No. I mean, Uldor could just have been a jerk all along, sure, but you don't just like up and kill your own dad for no reason.
No, but it depends on how we construct the political climate of the Empire of Bree.
It's true, and actually, people have committed murder for all kinds of terribly stupid
Uldor
reasons.
is the younger
I
son,
said
right?
that as if you had to have a reason to commit murder. I'm sorry.
I mean, Uldor is the younger
that.
son, right? He's not necessarily the heir apparent
Oh,
in
no.
whatever
Well,
whatever.
Ulfang isn't the heir apparent, but Uldor would be the heir apparent of Ulfang.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Oh, he is.
He could be.
He's the oldest son.
Yeah.
He is the
Yeah.
oldest son.
In the
Okay.
three names, his name comes
But
first.
I mean, again, like,
Yep.
how many times did the Emperor of Assyria get killed by his son, who was sick of waiting to be emperor? Like, that's a thing
Right.
that happens all the time, right?
Sure,
So-
sure, sure.
Right. And all that we need to have is a situation where Uldor believes that it is better to side against the elves rather than for them. Now the question is, and as soon as that happens, it's like, okay, I can kill two birds with one stone here. I can get control of the army and make a name for myself in one.
Uldor's corruption could have nothing to do with Sauron. When they get over there, right? When they get over there, Ulfang's army.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, they went over there on the premise that Morgoth was not real, right?
Mhm.
That they're just the elves are fighting a war against the gibbering hordes of bestial orcs, right?
Mhm.
And maybe some monsters that live in these northern hills for some reason, which is believable. What if Uldor just simply feels which direction the wind is blowing and says, you know what? My father is leading us to destruction. I'm going to take him down because I'm also a jerk and I'm also impatient to rule. And I think that my dad's a bit of a moron. And I have less respect for my father than everybody else around me. And I think I'm resentful because I think I can do a good job. So I have that baseline, right? And then I look at it and I say, you know what? No, the advantageous thing to do here is to switch sides. The elves, if we side with the elves, we're gonna be like the peon, vassals of these elf lords who are like, and he's gonna look at them. And he's like, we can't do anything with these people, right? Like, if they win, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna like? The Feanorians can do with us whatever they want to. And remember, he's met Caranthir, right? So he's like, look, this is the future for us. If these elves win, is bad, right? This is going to be horrible over here. At least not meeting my own personal Uldorian self-aggrandizing views of how it should be. Whereas if we make them lose, then so he doesn't even have to believe in Morgoth. If he,
Hang on.
Okay.
What if Ulfang is agnostic in regards to Melkor's existence?
Okay.
But what if the actual ruling class, the non-military ruling class, is of at least descended from the religious orders of the old Melkor worshipping civilization?
Yeah.
And the God Emperor is not, in fact, a God Emperor, but the Priest Emperor. Right? And right before they're ready to leave, he approaches Uldor with kind of like a, like you, an ambitious young man like yourself could certainly make a name for yourself out there. But your father thinks that he's going to fight, a headless group of monsters.
Right.
But we all know that's not really true.
Yeah, that's the big problem, is that it's hard to see how the Morgoth doesn't really exist line would work if a deep part of their culture was Morgoth worship still.
That's
But
fair.
I don't think
But
it
it's
needs
not-
to be any more than any of the other groups that have crossed the mountains to this point. Because again, we're far from Hildorian now.
Yes.
So these
Yeah.
groups who have moved here were just as motivated to get away from that as all the other groups we've met. And
Right, the Morgoth
We haven't-
worshippers are still living in the east.
Okay,
Far
right,
fair-
east.
and we
enough.
haven't shown any of the Edain having that attitude towards Morgoth.
Right.
The only one who had and does he even exist attitude was fake Amlach,
Fake
right?
Amlach. Yeah,
Right.
And that was
Sauron's
Sauron.
line. Yeah, yeah.
So,
Exactly.
like, real Amlach was like, I've now got a bone to pick with this guy in the north who totally does exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, then let me come at this another way. What if this guy, the God Emperor, reveals like evidence that they've been keeping under wraps this whole time, like documents or artwork or something. They're like, no, this was a real thing. Like, we don't do this anymore because nobody's heard of him until just now when this lady came across the mountains. But this was a real thing. I'm trying to get at some kind of motivation for the turn itself.
Again,
not just the kid, because then why doesn't the kid just kill him and take the army and fight against Morgoth? Like, how do we get
because he doesn't want, because when he gets over there and he sees the Noldor and the armies of the Noldor, he's like, I don't want those guys to win because we have no prayer against an army of Fëanorians. Like, there is no way.
There has to be a mixed motivation as to what that army was going to accomplish. Because if Galadriel delivers this giant army, that's a big deal. But if you have a giant army, you can point it anywhere. And the person in charge of the army gets to determine how this goes. And so Allfang's idea could have been, and we find new lands in the West for our people, and we expand the empire and like new kingdoms. Essentially, like satellite kingdoms.
Yeah.
Whereas Uldor can be looking at that and going, these elves aren't going to let us rule anything. We'd be vassals over here. We'd be very much second tier.
Exactly.
And we're not going to be in charge or respected or any of that. And he can be rejecting strongly that relationship with the elves. And
it would hurt his pride too. I mean, like, so the Emperor
of
Bree,
the Easterlings are mad that they get Dorloman.
Yes.
The House of Hador was thrilled that they got Dorloman.
Yes.
It's the same land.
Right.
So what makes that such a bad reward for the people who joined Morgoth and betrayed the elves? It's because they wanted all of Beleriand.
They wanted all of Beleriand.
Or at least something more than Dorloman.
And they were clearly not going to be able to get anything like that. They wouldn't even got Dorloman. I mean, they would have gotten Lothlon, right? Which blows.
Yeah,
I mean, that's horrible.
Well, the problem with this is that now Sauron might as well not even be there, though, because now he's not the reason why this happens.
But see, so he is the reason why the army goes. Like, he is still undermining Galadriel, but he doesn't have to create
Well, no, he's not undermining Galadriel because Galadriel gets the army to go.
What if Sauron?
And how's that work out for her?
Couldn't Sauron?
But if Sauron doesn't know that that's going to happen, then he didn't.
He does.
Then how?
Couldn't he?
He knows these people.
Couldn't he plant the idea that, like, you can't really trust these elves?
Right.
He could, through the Emperor. So
right. This is what I'm getting at. This is what I want to.
You've got the Emperor. You've got Ulfang, who is his quasi rival, or would be his rival if Ulfang weren't such a stand-up guy.
Right.
And then you've got Uldor, his embittered son, who is resentful of his father and thinks that he would be better. What Sauron brokers? So Sauron is behind the approval of the army in the first place. Like, basically, the way in which Sauron outwits Galadriel is simply like, she thinks that bringing the army is a good idea, that she is delivering staunch allies, and he has a whole plan. Like, he knows this is not going to work out. First of all, he just reads them better than she does, for one thing. So, like, she fails and he succeeds. But how he succeeds, again, why does the Emperor say yes to sending Ulfang? And he wants to get rid of Ulfang, but there are other ways. Have him killed. You're the God Emperor. You could do this, theoretically. Now, it's dangerous because the army is loyal to him and that creates problems. But if he is basically, the Emperor, that is essentially conspiring with Uldor before they leave, under Sauron's guidance,
Right.
So that when Uldor gets on his horse to ride out of Bree with his dad's army, Uldor is already thinking, the day is gonna come sooner or later when I do a coup and take over for my father, right? Like I'm totally doing that. And that's what the Emperor wants him to do. The Emperor's like, okay, the plan is your father's going to take this army because they won't follow anybody but your father on a crazy expedition like this, but they'll follow your dad, right? So that he's going to take the army and he's going to take them over the mountains. When they get over there, you're going to off him, and then you're going to take over there because they're already going to be there, and now they're going to be engaged, right? You're gonna. We don't want anything to do. This is the Sauron influence, right? We don't want to serve these elves. He's going to come and be like, Morgoth doesn't really exist, and the elves are horrible. Right, they're going to make you into slaves. Right, that's the elf plan. So appear to go along with Galadriel, and Ulfang is genuinely going along. Right, but Uldor pretend to go along, Emperor pretend to go along, and but then when you get over there, betray the elves. So Sauron can still plant the seed, but it doesn't have to be like a process of corruption. Like this is the Uldor strategy from the beginning. This is Uldor's big opportunity, and he thinks what's going to happen is they're going to go over there. The elves are going to squash the orcs. They're going to squash the elves at the critical moment, right? So at the end, it's going to be only the army of Uldor left standing on the field, with the Borean chariot driving our auxiliaries, and
of course Bor and Ulfang are best buds.
Sure.
Yeah, best buds. And now all of Beleriand is ours. Like that's the plan. And then to the Emperor, he's like, and now I've gotten rid of Ulfang, and now I've got a client,
satellite kingdom,
right, a client emperor on the other side of the mountains, and this is all excellent, right? And this also, of course, Maria, as you say, explains why being shunted into Dorloman is not victory.
Is a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Like we got you this.
But because not only is it a slap in the face for the people of Uldor, who thought they were going to rule Beleriand, but even for the Emperor, because they're cut off from the Emperor of Bree now, right? He has no client kingdom. They're just in the remote far northwestern corner of Beleriand.
A client kingdom of an actual god emperor.
Exactly. Yes.
So the question to me is, how much of that stuff are we showing alongside everything else?
I think we definitely need to show Uldor meeting with the Emperor privately, without his dad there, before the armies leave. How much of that meeting we see at the time, we could,
there can also be
we can
some,
split hairs on
imperial loyalists that he makes sure to send along with the army, because again, there's that sense of the division within the people of Ulfang, right? Some stay and some don't. So those who are diehard loyalists to Ulfang himself are not going to just side with Uldor.
Yes.
But that means there has to be a core of people, of leaders of the army, who were imperial plants all along, designed to follow Uldor as soon as they're in it, right? They're in the coup plans.
So, and these guys are probably like top members of the God Emperor's like personal guard, his like Praetorian Guard.
Yeah.
Like those are the guys you want, because clearly, like, they're already handpicked. For never, ever, ever going to murder me in my bathroom.
And this is part of how the Emperor bribes Uldor, and part of how he secures that, right? Is that they know their job, and their job is to A, help Uldor overthrow Ulfang at the appropriate moment, and then B, help to bring the rest of the army behind Uldor.
They straight up so when Uldor announces the death of his father to the army, and there's an uproar, these guys straight up come out of the woodwork and like murder the Ulfang's core commanders and take their spots. And here's the thing, like, Ulfang, he's an honorable stand-up guy, but he might be a ruthless guy
potentially.
Like, he's not, this guy is not like the elf friends,
right?
right? And
He's
so
still from that culture, right? I mean,
yes,
yeah.
yes, but he's not. He's not like Hador, and
Right.
he's certainly not like Beor.
Right.
And he
Hador
probably
is the great counterexample there. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Because remember, we've got Hurin as our main character this season, so Hurin is
Hurin is kind of
the
Hador.
parallel. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ulfang will be kind of like Hurin, but not quite like Hurin. And so actually, it'll be really interesting to play Hurin, Huor. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ulfang and Hurin as different versions of what Hador was.
Yeah.
And then Bor and his group will be more like Haleth.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then that leaves the House of Beor would be the Druedain.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the and Ulfang, like if Ulfang, like he meets Hurin and he's like, oh man, this guy, I like this guy. I kind of wish this guy was my son.
Right. That'll go over a treat with Uldor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But so right before they leave. So the only hint that this is about to go badly is that right before they leave, the God Emperor calls Uldor into his office and says, hey, I want you to meet my Praetorian Guard.
Who are coming with you.
I am going to give you command of them.
Yes.
For
do your thing.
For the trip. They are super loyal. They have never once turned against me.
Yep.
You know,
because see, this is the reason I have been inclining against the idea of Uldor getting corrupted by Sauron is that the whole, like, him and 1,000 other people would have to be corrupted by Sauron.
Right. Yes, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas this motivation that we're giving him is a fairly human motivation. Like, we could pull examples out of history of this kind of thing happening.
Exactly.
And you don't need a Sauron character to make that.
What you do is you have a Sauron character who is taking advantage of, like, the
human nature.
Again, the exact. So
he reads the room better than Galadriel
right.
does.
So in the scene where they're having tea together in the in the Denouement episode 13, is when it's revealed that that was a really good idea of yours to send my guard along with.
Thanks, experimental necromancer dude from the hills.
Weird
that was
guy.
a great idea.
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So we see that Sauron did undermine Galadriel, but really indirectly.
Yes.
Which is her plan was fundamentally flawed from the beginning. Which means it was her fault. That's the other thing.
The conclusion she's going to draw.
Right. Like,
it's not going to be like,
up.
I almost got it right, but I was thwarted by Sauron in the end, and therefore I hate him. It's going to be, all right, screw that. I'm not doing that anymore. We got to go in a different direction.
This diplomacy stuff doesn't work.
Diplomacy is horrible. What a waste of time. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
If you want an army done right, you got to build it yourself.
Exactly.
Which Sauron is like, yes, necromancy.
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, I would be kind of interested to see, because we haven't seen even a close to combat Galadriel since the kinslaying. It would be kind of interesting to see her reacting to what's happening. And like it would be really cool to see her take out a bunch of dudes. I'm here to tell you, especially if one of them's named Uldor.
Isn't she? She's surely going to march with Ulfang to broker their entrance into Beleriand and have tense moments with Cronthir but I mean she's going to be with the army. I mean that Galadriel's going to be at the Nearknife, I think has to happen, doesn't it? I mean that has to happen.
She can't do this and be like, all right, well, I'll give you army, peace out, y'all.
Exactly. I'm going to go do things now. Yeah, I mean so I think she's going to be interested.
Is she there when it all falls apart?
Yeah, but that means we have to factor that into Uldor's strategizing, because if he's got, the elf lady issue.
Can't be standing right next to him when he does it.
Right, exactly. Well, more
If we
importantly,
wanted
she
to
can't be standing
survive.
right next to Ulfang when Uldor tries to take him out. Right.
Right. Yeah.
I think that being a human internal politics situation is fine. She doesn't need to be like hands on. Do think though that if we're gonna kill Fingon and injure every single Feanorian in this battle, and if Maglor is gonna personally kill Uldor, then we've got to have Galadriel involved in Feanorian politics as well.
Hmm.
And I can't imagine that's gonna go very well. And
Also,
if
I'm not.
Celeborn is doing the Doriath diplomacy thing and she shows up, she could like totally sabotage his project too.
Right. I gotta think, why is she not at Ulfang's side when Uldor turns? Because she's with Maedhros trying to like, you know,
Right. She's off doing important elf business.
Yes.
Yep.
Also, I mean, how strongly attached are we to Maglor killing Uldor? Because I really don't have a problem giving that kill to Galadriel herself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Maglor kills plenty of people. I'm not really, you know.
I mean, this is the exact one person that's named that he kills.
How many named people does Maedhros kill?
Exactly. The fact that it's named that Maglor kills Uldor, it's like, yeah, but that is a story, or it was meant to be a story. So,
but that's my question. I'm not sure from the text
we have
what
a
the story
now
exactly
with Galadriel. So yeah, I understand making that change. But that means that if every single Feanorian gets wounded in this battle, Maglor gets the best kill of everybody. If it's not Uldor, whatever he gets is going to be good.
Actually, I think we can have our cake and eat it too here with this, especially if she is embroiled in Feanorian politics and that's what keeps her away and leaves Ulfang vulnerable to Uldor turning. Then she's like, all right, I'm going after him, and Maglor's like, I'm coming with you, right? Like if basically he is her support because he's one of the good Feanorians anyway, right? So if she's been having trouble with Feanorian politics, it's not with Maglor, right? He's going to be a good one on her side. So that the two of them ride in together and, you know, he ends up being the one doing the killing blow to Uldor seems... Again, I think we can preserve that while still having it happen in the context of a furious Galadriel riding in
also,
and approaching
Uldor
him on the battlefield. 2
younger brothers who we should also probably kill off in all this.
Well, they're killed by Ulfang's best bud Boar's
kids.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. They are. Yeah. But I mean, the point is we're going to have some personal reasons for people to attack each other at this part of the story. We can work it out. And yes, I understand that if we add Galadriel, we can add a significant kill for her.
Yeah.
But my issue with Maglor is that everyone's always like, oh, Maglor's a musician. Maglor's the gentle Feanorian. No. Maglor kills people, and we need to at least like maintain that. He doesn't like sit in a tower and
Did you read episode 12? He gets to kill plenty of people.
Right, but I want to preserve that in the narrative.
Of season 5.
It's all good. No, again, I think we can. I think we can do that. And Adola on YouTube was just raising a quick question about, she was a little bit worried about Galadriel's future trajectory, that like we seem to be setting her out into another tailspin again, and she's pointing out that of course like we need to put her in a constructive place to have children not too long after the first age, so there's a time limit on how long she could be in an emotional tailspin again after this. But I'm not worried about that because first of all, there's
Celeborn will be with her. It'll be fine.
Also, it's 5 seasons away.
Yeah.
So I realized that it is a short amount of time from the year 472 when the Near Ninth is to 526 when we end the first age. Yeah, it's not that long, but it's 5 seasons.
Yeah.
So plenty of time to have Galadriel be upset about the Near Ninth and then get over it as far as screen time goes.
Exactly. There'll be a lot of time for process. And honestly, even like her deciding to do the kingdom building thing, that can still be a trajectory that extends into the Second Age, but I don't think that need be in conflict with her.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like she's like dedicating herself, like, and swearing an oath that she will, like wear her armor until she, like, we're not talking about her going off the deep end like that. We're just talking about this informing her future moral choices in possibly unconstructive ways, but it doesn't mean she can't have, especially at the beginning of in the first few centuries of the Second Age, a long enough period of peace that she and Celeborn are like, okay,
family time.
I think it's time. Yeah.
Hey,
And
so,
if Celebrian is their only child, then like it's not like they can't like get a little bit more aggressive later, after Celebrian's an adult. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
hey, so who gives Allfang, if Allfang is the honorable guy now, who gets everybody's son, who gives him the name the Black? And
he has black hair.
And is it Sauron?
I also like the fact
Sauron
that
later spreads the story that Allfang actually betrayed them. And poisons the elves and the Edain against them.
Well, that's one of the other things, though, is that Galadriel's the only one who's going to really understand the politics, right? To the rest of the elves, they're just going to be like, well, this big army really backfired on us, like, and especially if there is a tendency, like a Thingolian tendency, of like bias against humans in many of the elves, right? It's not going to be a big leap for them to be like, okay, so let's chalk up this new human allies thing as a bad job from the beginning.
And everybody who was directly involved, everyone who would actually know better is now dead.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
So,
well, I mean, because again, like, so yeah, Ulfang is great, and he might have worked out marvelously, but Galadriel's like, she's the only one who knows that, because she's the only one who knows him.
And the way we're setting it up, she doesn't even really know what happened. So if someone comes and says, that guy betrayed us, she's going to be like, wait, really? Did he? Yeah. Let me talk to him. Well, he's dead.
Yeah.
What about his son? All dead.
A little bit.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
She's not going to be in a position to contravene it. She might as well. She'd probably be like, oh, I guess wow, boy, that really blew up my face.
That really, yes. This did not pan out after all.
That's, to me, that I like that. That seems like very much a Sauron outcome where even the one good guy who was involved, he gets murdered and his name gets sullied down the road.
Yeah, sure.
And Bor the whole time is like, no, that none of that happened. I promise you, I knew this guy his entire life. That never happened ever.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and we show the people of some of the people of Bor can escape and stuff. D-Rod Curry is saying, why is he called Ugly Beard, which is the literal translation of Ulfang.
It's a transliteration of his actual name in his native tongue.
Could be, but also honestly, this strikes me as a perfectly reasonable name to have. Like,
if you live in the Dwarf Road, I assure you, your beard is not the most impressive one.
Exactly. I mean, like, but it's like, you look at history, like there are a lot of kings with funny names, like called like, the fat or the bald or whatever, like
the unready.
The unready, right? Exactly. Yeah. There's lots of, traditions of giving kings and military leaders. Caesar means bald. Like the bald one, like it's like it's not, it's anyway, it's like his family name was Julius, like he was from the Julian family, but Caesar means bald. I mean, like it's like the tradition of having, or like the Roman generals who are affectionately called like the butcher, and anyway, like that, it's normal. Like this is a thing. This is a thing that happens. So maybe Ulfang actually has an ugly beard. Maybe he has like this weird scraggly beard. And all of his soldiers, have, called him Ulfang, Ugly Beard, ever since, he was a lower officer or whatever. There's probably a hilarious story behind this, maybe involving involving dwarves, that and lots of beer, from 30 years ago. Anyway, it doesn't seem to me like a problem, and certainly easy enough to draw an amusing backstory. Not that we need to feature that necessarily, but
We'll want to make Allfang somewhat personable, especially if we are showing him as a loyal guy, but also very ruthless.
Yeah.
That ruthlessness is gonna be what does him in, but we'll want to have some mitigating stories of how he was, a good dad or helped the kitten or, did something.
Yeah. I don't think Olfang's a good dad.
Okay.
I think
I was curious if we were gonna. There was a reason why his son's like this guy needs to go right now.
I think
his son has legitimate grievances.
He's an excellent general, but maybe should have spent more time with his kids. Is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Turns out.
Yeah, in retrospect, he might have invested some more family time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, then he definitely needs some story about why all his soldier guys love him so much.
Yeah. His soldiers.
Oh, they should all call him. They should all call him father. Like all of his soldiers call him some word that means dad.
Like Attila, for instance, which means daddy. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yes. No. Exactly. That's sort
super
of thing.
Salt in the wound.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. No. That's that. I think that seems exactly to be the kind of dynamic. And again, it doesn't make him a bad guy. He's just invested in his career. Didn't spend enough time with his kids. Yep. Excellent. No, I think this is a fun story. This is a fun story, and now we have, like the Uber Sultan of Bree. I'm delighted by the Emperor of Bree. Like I think this is excellent stuff. We even have a future there, Second Age, having established the Empire of Bree. Which of course Sauron can continue to make inroads in, right? He's not set on conquest quite yet, right? He's got other things to do, but that's not far down the road, right? Eventually, we don't even have to do anything. We can just come back to Sauron in 2 seasons, and meanwhile in Bree now they have statues of Sauron in the middle of the city, right?
And you're like, oh, something happened there,
right? Exactly. Nothing could be more. We go straight from the the tea party at the end of the season to 50-foot statues of Sauron in the middle of town. In 2 seasons, nothing.
Well, that escalated quickly.
Nothing could be more logical. I'm not saying we have to, but we wouldn't even have to explain it.
Right.
Of course that happened. Okay, awesome. Well, it is super late. I thought for sure we were not going to get through anything. But it turned out we did. Let's do now. But I feel bad because I actually neglected the PowerPoint almost completely. So let's just scan through to make sure we answered the questions because I think we did.
We got most of them.
Yeah. What are the people up to? What role does Sauron play? Okay. Yeah, we got all that. Right. We talked about the different Easterling peoples. This is how. Oh, we didn't talk about the Druedain. Okay. Still got to figure out the Wozes.
The Beleriand completely separate from the entire plot we just discussed.
Totally. I think absolutely they do.
They're the House of Baor in this. They have their own reason for coming over and it has nothing to do with Galadriel or a war.
Yes. And
maybe they met in Ent and they were friends, so they followed the Ent. I don't know.
Yeah. We could have them come in a totally different route. They could come in the south, along the south of the Blue Mountains, along the coast. And come up into Osirian and then up into Beleriand from the forests in the south, right? So Tower Imduanath could be Druedain territory, basically. Long before.
So just have a Druedain bottle episode right in the middle of the season. Just to take a break from all the other grim stuff.
That would be really fun, strange but fun. Yeah, I'm not sure. One of my questions is what we have the Druedain do
Yeah, we need to still answer that, I think.
this season. Yeah, like how are they going to be involved in the story? Yeah. But yeah, I think, and also, by the way, we'll notice that this also puts the Druedain organically close to the havens of Sirion as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that they could, the Druedain are going to help to guide and protect the refugees on the way to the havens of Sirion.
Okay.
So we'll meet the Druedain. We'll have a big Druedain subplot with Idril and Tuor and Earendil and the refugees of Gondolin coming down. They will be like suckered in the wilderness by the Druedain, and the folks of Nargothrond could too, potentially, though they're coming from the other side. But anyway, yeah. So long term, I can see
so we would be meeting them possibly at the end of season 8, but not before.
Well, at latest by then, I think.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not sure that we need them this season necessarily, because I don't think they're going to be involved in the Near Ninth, are they?
I wouldn't think so.
I wouldn't think so either. So I don't know that we need them.
Okay.
But I think we can put them in South Beleriand.
If they're in Osirian, Galadriel could meet them, realize they're completely useless, and then go across the mountains and find people that are helpful.
Right.
I maybe did not word that well, but the point is...
I hear that. I'm not sure I love the optics of Galadriel meeting the Druedain and being like, so, can I form you into a military... Nah, never mind. Forget it. Just like, I'm going to upgrade, right? You know.
But really, they were the ones she should have been
Right.
after all along.
Right.
I don't know. But that's the only way I can think to connect them to what we just talked about.
I think we wait on them. And I think that for now, they're hanging out in the southern forests, minding their own business, and they're not bothered by anything or anybody. As things get worse in Beleriand, post Near Ninth, right? Then they start to come out, both because the orcs are starting to invade and burn the forests and stuff down there, which is why they hate the Gorgun, right? From the beginning. But also, like, they... building on the foundation only of the Faithful Stone story, right? There seems to be an impulse like to help, basically, you know, for them to appoint themselves in some sense guardians of the land and to help the, like they do with the Rohirrim, help the ally, you know, the enemies of the Gorgun, right? Who are being oppressed.
There's a reason I picked the Ents as the one group that might actually understand what they were up to.
Yes, exactly. Especially since you've got to think that Treebeard loves it down here, right? In Taran Duinoth, and we know, you know, he likes it down.
Okay. Yeah. So Treebeard could have a conversation with Galadriel before she crosses the mountains.
Yes.
And he could talk about the delightful people he's met in the South. Not in a military sense at all, just he's being Treebeard. He met people, they were delightful.
Right. And he could tell her that he doesn't think they would be allies in war. Like, that's not their...
Well, but she could be saying, well, I want to go find some allies in war. He's like, oh, I haven't met any people like that.
Yeah.
And then she's like, okay, got to cross the mountains.
Right.
So that might be a way of her not being, like, completely dismissive of an entire group of people.
Exactly. No, that would seem highly imperialistic of Galadriel. But again, because we know eventually the Druedain are going to come to Brethil. But again, I think if they come to Brethil during like the general Turin period, right, when post Near Ninth, when the orcs are invading, some of the Druedain would come to the Forest of Brethil and help out. But they wouldn't necessarily even be there yet, because they only come when things start getting worse. So they wouldn't actually do anything. But yeah, we could hear about them from Treebeard.
Okay.
You know, if Galadriel, I love the Galadriel conversation with Treebeard idea, because she will have known, like, he's been everywhere. Like, you have wandered widely along these lands. I've never been, east of the mountains. Can you help steer me in the direction of, like, what's coming? Are there more humans coming? And he could say, like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of them, right? I was just wandering over with the squirrels on the other, in the squirrel empire on the other side of the mountains, and north of the squirrels, there's like tons of humans.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole
things
empire
that-
of the squirrels is a totally different
Right.
subplot.
Treebeard just starts counting things that seem numberless. It's like things that are numberless: the stars in the sky, the trees in this forest, the squirrels in
The
this
squirrels in
kingdom,
the forest, of
and the
Earador.
humans north of the squirrels.
And the humans north of that. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yep. Exactly. That's exactly it. That would be a great way both to get Treebeard involved again, so that we can be prepared for Ent involvement relating to the Silmaril. But anyway, yeah. Okay. Spoiler. That's my answer to the question of how did the Feanorians ambush the dwarves and not end up with the Silmaril.
The ends.
Treebeard swipes it and brings it to Luthien. The Ents are fighting the dwarves, right? The Ents are fighting the dwarves. All we have to have is the Ents kill the dwarves who are carrying the Nauglamir with the Silmaril in it. And then now you've got Treebeard with a decision to make. Does he give it to the Feanorians? Does he trust them? No, he's going to give it to Luthien. Why wouldn't he? Easy peasy. But anyway, that's a conversation for a different time. All right.
It is indeed.
Thank you, everybody. This was awesome. I love the proto history of Arador that we have developed here. I think this is going to be great fun, we're so close to being ready to plan the season now. I think we have most of the cast of characters set out there. So, okay, awesome. Then our next, so I should go back to like what's actually next. Next is Thursday, November 2nd. 2 weeks from tonight, again, maintaining our schedule for the whole season so far. And we're planning to do the frame story, just concept of the frame story, what we want to happen there. That will be the main focus next time. And then after that, we'll start planning. We'll start fleshing out the episode outline after that. So very good. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And I will see you guys again soon, and say, as always, thanks for listening and Godspeed.